Before we start, make sure you're warm, safe, and settled. No need to stay awake. This is your permission to doze off. You crack open your eyes to the dim light of the 14th century, and no, that's not just a bad dream. Welcome to a day in the life of a medieval soldier, where the sun isn't just rising, it's your alarm clock. Get ready to trade your comfy duvet for 50 pounds of metal misery. That's right, your morning workout involves wriggling into a suit of armour that might as well double as a full-body sauna. But hey, at least it's a free steam bath, right? Let's talk about this armour for a moment. It's not just a fashion statement, it's a medieval status symbol with a price tag to match. Back then, a full suit of armour could set you back around £40 sterling. Adjusted for inflation, that's like forking over the cash for a decent starter home today. Who knew playing dress-up could be so financially crippling? And don't even think about swapping out that dented breastplate for a shiny new one without first taking out a second mortgage. Now, before you set off on today's noble quest, read Surviving Until Lunchtime, you need to fuel up. No eggs, Benedict or avocado toast here. Breakfast is an exercise in gastronomic endurance. You'll find yourself gnawing on bread that's less freshly baked and more weaponized. And the meat? Let's just say it has a certain mystery. It's cured, all right? Cured of any flavour it might have once possessed. As you chew through what feels like a medieval challenge round of "Can you swallow this?", you might find your thoughts drifting to the romanticised image of the gallant knight. Spoiler alert, you're not that guy. You're a foot soldier, the medieval equivalent of an unpaid intern who's tasked with all the dirty work and none of the glory. Knights get the poems and the fanfare, you get the blisters and the backache. But hey, at least you don't have to worry about falling off a horse, right? Armour maintenance is another joy of medieval life. Imagine trying to keep a suit of steel clean and rust-free without the help of modern lubricants or even a decent scouring pad. It's a wonder anyone had time to actually fight. Armourers were the unsung heroes, keeping you in fighting shape and making sure your gear didn't end up looking like it had been used as a battering ram. But let's be real. Even the best-maintained armour is still a tin can with straps, and if you think it's going to make you invincible, you might need a reality check. Speaking of reality, let's debunk some myths. The notion of the noble, chivalrous knight is more about medieval PR than actual practice. In truth, most of the time, knights were more concerned with pillaging the countryside than preserving damsels in distress. And those gallant tournaments? Basically, medieval reality. TV flashy, brutal, and all about the spectacle. As you adjust your helmet and prepare to step into the fray, remember that the medieval battlefield is more chaos than choreography. It's not an elegant dance, it's a mosh pit with weapons. The noise, the confusion, the sheer physicality of it all. It would make even the most hardened gladiator wince. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to reflect on the absurdity of it all as you trudge through the mud, shield in one hand, questionable meat in the other. So, there you have it. Sunrise to mid-morning in the medieval military grind. It's not for the faint-hearted or the fashion-conscious, but it's all in a day's work for a 14th century foot soldier. Now, if you survive until lunch, that's a whole new adventure. As you trudge to the rally point, the weight of the morning hangs on you like the chainmail you're desperately trying to keep from rusting. You're not just marching to the beat of the battle drum, you're part of a logistical nightmare that makes modern supply chain issues look like a minor inconvenience. Let's rip the chainmail off the economics behind medieval warfare, shall we? The costs of raising an army back then were enough to make even the most seasoned accountant break into a cold sweat. First off, you've got to feed these hungry troops, and let me tell you, that's no small feat. We're talking about 200,000 pounds of grain to keep your fellow soldiers from turning into hangry rebels. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You also need meat, cheese, and the occasional barrel of ale to keep morale from plummeting into the mud. All of this means that your average medieval army was less a nimble fighting force and more a lumbering, hungry beast. You know, like that friend who never seems to stop snacking. But wait, there's more. You've got to pay the soldiers too. No one's swinging a sword for free, after all. A skilled archer or pikeman might earn around 2 pence a day, which doesn't sound like much until you realise it's about the price of a decent meal. Multiply that by thousands of troops, and suddenly you're hemorrhaging silver faster than a dragon hoarding gold. And that's without even mentioning the cost of horses, weapons, and armour. It's enough to make a king consider a career change. So why go through all this trouble? Why cough up monumental sums and mobilize half the kingdom just to bash a few heads? Political pressures, my friend, political pressures. Wars in the Middle Ages weren't just about who owned what land. They were about who had the biggest crown jewels, if you catch my drift. Territorial disputes were often less about actual territory and more about flexing royal egos. Imagine a medieval version of my castle's bigger than yours, but with more bloodshed. Of course, it wasn't all just royal vanity. Sometimes these conflicts stemmed from genuine strategic concerns. Control of trade routes, valuable resources, or even just a particularly scenic view could spark a conflict. But let's not kid ourselves. Many wars were as chivalrous as a pub brawl, with all the subtlety of a charging warhorse. The noble causes we read about in storybooks often had more in common with a drunken bet than a principled stand. And here you are, a foot soldier caught in the crossfire of these grandiose ambitions and political games. The romanticized image of the gallant knight charging nobly into battle? That's the stuff of ballads and bedtime stories. The reality is much more mundane and a lot less flattering. You're more likely to be trampled by your own side's cavalry than saved by a heroic charge. But hey, at least you're not the one footing the bill for all this chaos. As you reach the rally point, you can't help but wonder if there's more to this medieval madness. Perhaps there's some grand design you're just not privy to. Or maybe, just maybe, the whole thing is as absurd as it seems. After all, when you're staring down the business end of a spear, the finer points of medieval economics and royal vanity tend to lose their shine. But fear not, brave soldier, for the day is still young and the battlefields of history have plenty more lessons to teach. Keep your wits sharp and your sword sharper, because who knows what medieval misadventures await as you march ever onward. So, as you trudge along with your fellow foot soldiers, the reality of medieval military life begins to sink in deeper than the mud caking your boots. Marching to the battlefield isn't just a stroll through the countryside. It's a grueling test of endurance that would make a marathon look like a gentle jog through the park. You're covering up to 20 miles a day, and as if that wasn't enough, you're lugging around a solid 30 pounds of gear, which is essentially like carrying a toddler who really enjoys medieval cosplay. Let's not forget the physical toll. After the first few miles, you start questioning the wisdom of whoever decided that wearing a chainmail vest was a good idea for a brisk walk. Your shoulders ache, your back protests, and your feet start plotting a mutiny. But hey, at least the scenery's nice, right? Just you, the open road, and the constant threat of blisters the size of small countries. Now, you might think that with all this marching, there'd be a well-organized chain of command to keep things running smoothly. Well, think again. Welcome to the murky world of medieval military hierarchy, where who's in charge can change faster than you can say battlefield promotion. Decisions could hinge on who was the king's current favourite. So much for meritocracy. If the king decided you were the bee's knees, congratulations, you might just find yourself leading a troop. But if you fell out of favour, well, let's just say you'd better get used to the view from the back of the line. This chaotic command structure meant that leadership was often as stable as a sandcastle at high tide. Imagine trying to follow orders when those orders could be rescinded, revised or completely reversed, depending on where the king's mood or his latest crush was swinging. You've got a war council that's more like a game of musical chairs, with the music provided by the clash of swords and the occasional cry of, "What do you mean we're retreating?" We haven't even started. But let's shift gears to one of the most enduring myths of medieval warfare, the honourable duel. Ah, the romanticised image of two knights squaring off in a fair fight, steel clashing, with honour and glory hanging in the balance. Except, here's the kicker, most fights were less about chivalry and more about chaos. Picture a rugby scrum, but instead of a ball, you've got swords, axes, and the occasional flail thrown into the mix. The battlefield wasn't a place of noble duels, it was a cacophony of clangs, shouts, and the ever-present risk of friendly fire. In the heat of battle, those valiant one-on-one combats were more like a game of who can hit who first, amid the throng of bodies jostling for position. The reality is that the medieval battlefield was a melee, a term that, quite literally, means a confused fight or scuffle. And if you think there was any time to stop and admire the finesse of a well-executed parry, well, let's just say you'd be better off focusing on keeping your head attached to your shoulders. There's a common misconception that knights were the noble warriors of their time, upholding a code of conduct that made battle a gentleman's affair. But in practice, chivalry was more of a PR campaign than a battlefield reality. Sure, there were rules about not stabbing your opponent in the back, but let's be honest, when the stakes are life and death, all bets are off. Winning was the name of the game, and if that meant a few underhanded tactics, so be it. As you march ever onward, the romantic allure of medieval warfare starts to wear thin. The reality is as brutal as it is grueling, with each step a reminder that, more often than not, the true victors weren't the knights in shining armor, but the guys who managed to keep their wits and their limbs intact. You begin to understand that the stories of valor and honor were just that. Stories, crafted to inspire and entertain, but bearing little resemblance to the gritty truth. And yet, despite the blisters, the backaches, and the bewildering bureaucracy, there's something undeniably compelling about being part of this living tableau of history. There's a strange camaraderie that forms in the crucible of shared hardship, a bond forged in the fires of war and the absurdity of it all. Sure, you might be marching toward a battle that's less about glory and more about survival, but at least you're not doing it alone. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. More marching, probably, maybe a skirmish or two, and definitely more of that delightful culinary adventure that is medieval rations. But for now, there's nothing to do but rest your weary bones, dream of a day when you don't have to wear your weight in metal, and prepare for whatever fresh madness awaits on the morrow. So keep your spirits high and your shield higher, brave soldier. The road ahead may be long and fraught with peril, but it's also a journey into the heart of history's most tumultuous times. And who knows? Maybe one day, centuries from now, people will tell tales of your adventures, romanticizing your struggles and your triumphs. Until then, just try not to trip over your own sword. As dawn breaks, you tighten your grip on your sword, ready to step into the theatrical chaos known as medieval warfare. Forget the grandiose showdowns of Hollywood. It's more mud, blood, and mayhem than choreographed grandeur. Welcome to the medieval battlefront, where cavalry, archers, and infantry play a high-stakes game of chess, only it's more like a bar brawl with a side of strategy. First up, let's talk cavalry. These knights on horseback might seem like the rock stars of the battlefield, but they're not exactly galloping into a Monty Python sketch. Imagine trying to maintain formation while charging at breakneck speed. Spoiler alert, it's not elegant. These guys are the tanks of the medieval world, their sheer momentum enough to break enemy lines like a bowling ball through pins. But they're also high-maintenance divas, keep them well fed and their horses shod, or they're as useful as a swordfish in a sword fight. Now, let's pivot to the archers, the snipers of their day. Armed with longbows, they could shoot an arrow up to 250 yards, which is about the length of 2.5 football fields. Impressive, right? These guys rain down death from above, turning the battlefield into a medieval version of dodgeball, except the stakes are a tad higher. But don't let the romantic image of Robin Hood fool you. The life of an archer was grueling. Stringing a longbow required the strength of a bodybuilder and the precision of a surgeon. Miss your mark and you're toast. Then there's the infantry, the unsung heroes, or should I say, the cannon fodder. These foot soldiers bear the brunt of the battle, thrusting and parrying through a chaotic melee. Their job is to hold the line, come hell or high water, or in their case, a rain of arrows and a wall of cavalry. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. And while they might not get the songs or the glory, they're the backbone of any medieval army. But let's not romanticize this pandemonium. The reality of medieval warfare is more horror show than hero's journey. Injuries were as common as mud, and let's just say the medical care made modern healthcare look like a luxury spa weekend. If you were lucky enough to survive a battle unscathed, you'd still face the risk of infection from even the smallest cut. And the medical tools? Think more rusty pliers than state-of-the-art surgical instruments. It's hard to believe that barber surgeons were the top medical professionals of the time, wielding both a razor and a saw with equal gusto. In the aftermath of battle, survival of the fittest wasn't just Darwinian theory. It was your daily reality. Nobles might get the benefit of a ransom or a quick treatment, but the average soldier? If you were injured, your chances were as grim as a winter solstice in Scandinavia. Can't walk, tough luck. Can't fight, tougher luck. You were either patched up with whatever was at hand or left to become part of the landscape. And here's the kicker. The romantic notion of medieval battles as glorious and noble. Pure fiction. The aftermath was a grim reminder of the cost of war, a gruesome tableau of human endeavour's darkest sides. Bodies lay strewn across fields, a testament to the brutal reality of conflict. The clean-up was less heroic than essential, a grim task that underscored the cost of what some called glory. Yet, despite the muck and madness, these battles shaped the course of history. They were the crucible where kingdoms were forged and broken. Political maps were redrawn as often as the tides, and a single battle could shift the balance of power. These skirmishes were the dramatic climaxes in the saga of medieval geopolitics, each one a page in a history book written in blood and sweat. The romanticism of the era endures for a reason. It's a tale of knights and castles, of epic clashes and noble quests. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was far from the bedtime stories. It was a time when power was won and lost on the battlefield, not in the courtly halls or through diplomatic parleys. And for the foot soldier, it was a life of unrelenting hardship and perpetual uncertainty. So, as you brace yourself for the next wave of combat, remember this. Medieval warfare was less about chivalry and more about survival. It was a brutal dance of death where cunning and tactics trumped honour and glory. And while the legends might paint a picture of valiant knights and noble causes, the truth was as gritty as the mud beneath your boots. Keep your sword sharp and your wits sharper, because the battle is just beginning. And as the dust settles and the sun dips below the horizon, casting the battlefield in a haunting glow, you can't help but wonder what drives men to such madness. Is it ambition, honour, or something deeper? The answers might be as elusive as a knight's steed in full gallop. But one thing's for sure, history isn't just written by the victors, it's carved in stone by those who lived to tell the tale. So hold your head high and your shield higher, because tomorrow is another day in the unpredictable saga of medieval warfare. As the final echoes of battle fade into the twilight, you find yourself standing amidst the aftermath, a bizarre blend of victory and loss. The air is heavy with the metallic scent of blood, and the ground beneath you feels more battlefield than terra firma. Congratulations, soldier, you've survived another day in the medieval mosh pit. But don't go polishing that sword just yet. The real work begins now. First on the post-battle to-do list, dealing with the grim task of burying the dead. It turns out that medieval warfare, much like a bad party, leaves quite the mess behind. The dead don't bury themselves, and leaving them to rot is not just a health hazard, it's an open invitation for scavengers and disease alike. So, grab a shovel, if you can find one that hasn't been repurposed as a weapon, and get to work. This was a grim, necessary ritual, a sobering reminder that even in war, respect for the fallen held some currency. Next up, it's time for some medieval DIY. Repairing gear is essential unless you fancy charging into the next battle with armour that looks like Swiss cheese. You might not have access to a Black & Decker toolkit, but you do have basic hammers and anvils. Those dents and dings in your chainmail aren't just fashion statements, they're vulnerabilities begging to be exploited. So, you spend your evening hammering out imperfections, a blacksmith of necessity rather than trade. Amid all this, the psychological toll of warfare begins to surface. Let's face it, experiencing combat is a fast track to existential crisis. You've faced death, you've witnessed the brutality your fellow man is capable of, and now you're left with the haunting memories that refuse to fade as easily as the daylight. Back then, there was no PTSD hotline or therapy sessions, just the camaraderie of your fellow soldiers, and perhaps a stiff drink of whatever ale you could scrounge up. As you sit around the campfire, the myths of medieval glory start to unravel. You've been part of history in the making, but not the chivalric ballad type. That romanticized image of the noble knight riding off into the sunset? More like a soldier trudging through the muck, hoping for a warm meal and a dry place to sleep. It's not that the legends aren't appealing, they're just, well, selective in their storytelling. They love the heroics but gloss over the less glamorous bits, like the lice, the mud, and the ever-present stench of unwashed humanity. Now, let's dive into those myths, shall we? The legendary knight in shining armour, defender of the realm and all-around good guy, is a staple of medieval lore. But here's the truth. Knights were often more concerned with land grabs and personal glory than any noble cause. Your average medieval soldier was less concerned with saving maidens and more focused on saving his own skin. The reality was far more gritty, with personal vendettas and political machinations as common as a good sword fight. Popular culture has done a number on the medieval soldier's image, painting them as larger-than-life figures. But the truth is, these were men driven by necessity, duty, and sometimes desperation. They were neither saints nor devils, just humans navigating the turbulent tides of history. So what did it truly mean to be a soldier in the Middle Ages? It was a life on the edge, a constant dance with danger where survival was the only real victory. It was about enduring hardship, facing fear head-on, and finding solace in the shared experience of those around you. In a world where life could be as unpredictable as the weather, you learned to appreciate the little victories, a warm fire, a hearty meal, and the company of those who understood your struggles. As the camp settles into a weary slumber, you reflect on the day's lessons and the strange allure of this life. Sure, it's brutal and unforgiving, but there's a raw authenticity to it that's hard to find elsewhere. It's a reminder that history isn't just about grand events and iconic figures. It's about the countless individuals who lived, fought, and died in the margins of those stories. And so, as the embers fade and the stars blaze overhead, you find a peculiar peace in knowing that you are part of something larger than yourself. You are a thread in the vast tapestry of history, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. With a final nod to the absurdity of it all, you close your eyes, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. After all, in this medieval Game of Thrones, it's not just about winning, it's about surviving to tell the tale. So, here's a tale that starts not with knights in shining armour or grand castles, but with a bunch of incredibly determined people and some very seaworthy canoes. We're talking about the Austronesians, those fearless navigators who kind of made the sea their personal playground. Around 3000 BCE, they decided that Taiwan was just a little too cozy for their taste and, with a collective shrug, set their sights on the endless blue yonder. These folks weren't just dabbling in water sports, they were the OG maritime explorers. Forget GPS or Google Maps, these guys had skills that would make any modern-day sailor weep. They used the star compass, a system so elegant and precise that it's basically the celestial version of a cheat code. By observing the stars, waves, and even the flight patterns of birds, they could navigate across vast oceans like they were taking a stroll down a familiar street. And thanks to their trusty outrigger canoes, which were as stable as a rock in choppy waters, they could get where they needed to go without becoming shark bait. Now, if you're picturing these voyages as romantic, reckless dashes into the unknown, you might want to dial it back a bit. Sure, the idea of setting sail into the great unknown sounds adventurous, but let's be real. These voyages weren't just about satisfying some existential wanderlust. The Austronesians were savvy traders, not just idle explorers. It wasn't just about seeing what was over the next horizon, it was about finding goods to sell and swap. Pottery, spices, shells, and even pigs. Yes, pigs were on the trading menu. This was a network of trade routes that would make modern logistics managers drool. From Taiwan, these mariners fanned out across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, a massive water world that covers about 1/3 of the planet's surface. Imagine setting out on an epic road trip, except instead of highways and pit stops, it's endless waves and the occasional volcanic island. They spread out as far as Madagascar in the west and Easter Island in the east, a distance spanning thousands of miles. That's like crossing the Atlantic multiple times, but without the luxury of stopping for coffee in Iceland. And while we love a good myth, let's debunk the idea that these journeys were purely exploratory. Romanticizing their voyages as mere quests for new lands is like saying Columbus just wanted a change of scenery. Nope, the Austronesians were traders first and foremost. They had goods to move and markets to conquer. These were trade missions with a side of discovery, not the other way around. The sea was their highway, and they navigated it like pros, with a supply chain that would make Amazon blush. So, next time you hear about these ancient mariners, think less about moons and stars guiding lonely wanderers, and more about a bustling, buzzing network of trade and commerce. They weren't just finding new places, they were connecting them, trading goods, and spreading cultures. The Austronesians were more than just adventurers. They were the original maritime entrepreneurs, navigating vast distances with nothing but the stars to guide them and a keen eye on the bottom line. And speaking of these ancient maritime entrepreneurs, let's take a closer look at that sprawling network they spun across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The Austronesians weren't just island-hopping romantics, they were the logistical masterminds of their time. They didn't just conquer the sea, they turned it into a bustling trade highway with rest stops that stretched from the Lapita Cultural Complex all the way to the shores of Madagascar by around 500 CE. That's right, they were trading with a flair that would put any modern import-export business to shame. Let's break down the Lapita Cultural Complex first. This wasn't just a random scattering of islands with similar pottery patterns. Oh no, this was a finely tuned network, a veritable archipelago of activity with a shared cultural toolbox that included some of the earliest known instances of a unified trading system. We're talking about a network that extended approximately 4,000 kilometers across the Pacific. To put that in perspective, that's like driving from New York City to Los Angeles, but without the luxury of roadside diners or rest areas. Just you, the ocean, and the distant silhouette of a palm-fringed island. The Lapita people were the original influencers of the Pacific, moving goods like obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than your average wit, which was highly prized for its cutting edge, quite literally. They also traded intricately designed pottery that was as much a status symbol as it was a practical item. These weren't just clay pots, they were the Gucci bags of their day, flaunted by those in the know across the Pacific. And of course, let's not forget about those pigs. Yes, pigs were practically the Bitcoin of their time, traded across islands as a measure of wealth and prosperity. But this wasn't your average barter system. The Austronesians had what you might call a proto-currency, a sophisticated understanding of trade that went beyond simple swaps. They had a keen sense of value in exchange, knowing that a well-placed piece of obsidian could fetch them more than its weight in coconuts. They were the Gordon Geckos of the sea routes, understanding that trade was about leverage and negotiation as much as it was about the goods themselves. As for Madagascar, this wasn't just a happy accident or a case of, let's see where the wind takes us. By 500 CE, Austronesian sailors had made their way to this African island some 4,000 miles from their original stomping grounds. And they didn't just bring their navigational prowess, they brought a cultural infusion that left a genetic and linguistic legacy still evident today. The Malagasy language, a unique blend of Austronesian roots and African influences, is a testament to this remarkable voyage. It's like finding a Polynesian footprint on African soil, an enduring reminder of just how far these traders went. The commodities exchanged weren't just about survival, they were about creating shared economies and bolstering alliances. Spices, those tantalizing flavors that could make even the blandest yam sing, were part of the trade repertoire. These weren't just culinary delights. They were exotic treasures that added a dash of prestige to any table. And let's be real, who wouldn't want a pinch of prestige with their dinner? The Austronesians' reach, spanning from the Pacific Islands to the Indian Ocean's western fringes, wasn't just a testament to their seafaring skills. It was a blueprint for globalization, long before the word entered our vocabulary. They crafted a web of connections that transcended mere geography, creating a melting pot of cultures, goods, and ideas. This trade wasn't just transactional, it was transformative, reshaping the social and economic landscapes of entire regions. So next time you hear a romanticized story of island paradises and leisurely ocean voyages, remember the gritty truth. These weren't leisurely jaunts into the unknown, they were calculated moves in a game of maritime chess. The Austronesians were playing for keeps, with stakes that included not just goods but influence and cultural exchange. They weren't just sailing the seas, they were weaving the fabric of a connected world, one trade route at a time. The Austronesian network was a feat of human ingenuity, a testament to what can be achieved with a sharp mind, a sturdy canoe, and an unquenchable thirst for connection. They weren't just intrepid explorers, they were the architects of an ancient economic system that defied the limitations of their time. And that, dear listener, is where the real magic of their story lies. Not in the myths, but in the magnificent reality they forged across the waves. As we sail further into the vast ocean of Austronesian history, it's time to anchor down on how these salty sea dogs not only mastered the waves, but also the art of social and political influence. Now, here's the kicker. Their trade routes were about as calm as a stormy sea when it came to social structures. First off, let's talk about chiefdoms. Think of them as the original corporate executives, minus the boardroom, but with a lot more ceremonial headgear. These were societies where a chief, often a charismatic leader, held sway over resources and trade. And let's be clear, we're not talking about a quaint village headman. Oh no, this was more like a CEO of a major multinational wielding power, influence, and, dare I say, a touch of flair. In fact, the influence of these chiefs stretched far and wide, so much so that their names and deeds became the stuff of legend. And just like any good CEO, they knew the importance of networking. Trading wasn't just about goods. It was about cementing alliances and strengthening political standing. But don't go thinking this was some kind of egalitarian paradise where everyone held hands and sang songs around the fire. The trade networks facilitated serious social stratification. The chiefs and their close circles, let's call them the board of directors, enjoyed the cream of the trade crop. We're talking about the best pottery, the sharpest obsidian, and yes, the juiciest pigs. Meanwhile, the average Joe, or in this case the average Tooper, was more like the guy fetching coffee for the higher-ups. And here's where it gets even more interesting. These trade routes weren't just moving goods, they were moving ideas, languages, and cultural practices. Austronesian languages spread like wildfire, evolving and adapting as they hit new shores. But let's bust a myth here. The idea of a single, unchanging Austronesian culture is about as realistic as a pirate's treasure map. Regional variations were the name of the game. Each island, each chiefdom, had its own spin on the Austronesian lifestyle. From different dialects to unique pottery styles, they were more like a diverse family of cultures rather than a homogeneous block. The spread of language was a big deal. Today, there are around 1,200 Austronesian languages, spoken from Madagascar to Hawaii. That's like a linguistic marathon across the globe. But this wasn't just about communication, it was a tool of power. Language facilitated trade negotiations, marriage alliances, and even the spread of religious beliefs. It was the social media of its day, connecting people across vast distances and diverse cultures. Let's not forget that these chiefdoms were also hotbeds of innovation. The need to manage resources and trade routes efficiently spurred developments in everything from agriculture to boat building. Some islands became centres of specialised production. For instance, the island of Yap in Micronesia became famous for its stone money, massive discs of carved limestone that were traded across the islands. Imagine lugging one of those to the market. Now, if you think these regional variations led to constant conflict, think again. While there were undoubtedly skirmishes, we're talking about human societies after all, trade networks often acted as a stabilizing force. The stakes were high, and maintaining a peaceful route was usually more lucrative than war. That's not to say they all sat around a table and signed peace treaties, but the Austronesians understood that a broken trade route was bad for business. So, while the tales of epic voyages and daring explorers make for great stories, the real heart of the Austronesian legacy lies in their social and political impact. They weren't just connecting dots on a map. They were weaving a complex tapestry of cultures, languages, and power structures that spanned continents. The Austronesians were not only masters of the sea, but also of the very human art of influence and adaptation. And with this intricate backdrop of social manoeuvring and cultural exchange, the world was set for even more dramatic shifts. As we continue to explore the Austronesian impact, remember that their legacy is not just in the lands they reached, but in the enduring influence they wielded over the very fabric of societies. So grab your metaphorical spyglass, because the next leg of this journey promises even more twists and turns. With the Austronesians already playing the ancient world's version of Monopoly, let's throw in a game-changing innovation, the crab claw sail. Picture a sail shaped like a crab's pincers, and you get the gist. Forget those sluggish square sails of yore. This was a sleek, aerodynamic marvel that made their boats faster and more manoeuvrable. It's like swapping out your family sedan for a sports car. This design wasn't just about speed, it was about control. It allowed these nautical navigators to tack against the wind with a finesse that would leave even seasoned sailors slack-jawed. The crab-claw sail was the iPhone of its time, revolutionary, coveted, and a game-changer in maritime tech. These sails were crucial for navigating the trade winds that crisscrossed the Pacific and Indian Oceans. When you're dealing with distances that make a New York to LA road trip look like a jaunt to the local grocery store, every knot counts. And the Austronesians, with their crab claw sails billowing, could slice through waves like a chef through sashimi. This tech was no backyard innovation either. Its precision was the result of centuries of empirical know-how passed down through generations like a family secret recipe. But while we're here marveling at their technological prowess, let's address the elephant, or should I say the deforested island in the room. There's a tempting myth that the Austronesians were the ultimate eco-warriors, living in perfect harmony with nature. It's a nice thought, like imagining that your chocolate cake is calorie-free. But reality, as it so often does, has other ideas. Sure, they respected the sea, but their impact on land was less like a gentle footprint and more like a trampled garden. Take Easter Island, for example. Once a lush paradise, it became a cautionary tale of ecological overshoot. The island was originally covered in palm trees, many of which vanished due to the Austronesian penchant for grandiose statues and, ironically, more boats. Deforestation led to soil erosion and eventually agricultural collapse. By the time Europeans arrived, the island's ecosystem was a shadow of its former self. It's a sobering reminder that even the most resourceful societies can overextend their reach. And Easter Island wasn't an isolated case. Across the Pacific, Austronesians left their mark, sometimes quite literally. They cleared vast tracts of forest for agriculture, built artificial islands, and introduced non-native species like pigs and rats, which disrupted local ecologies. It's the ancient equivalent of bringing a couple of uninvited friends to a party and having them eat everything in sight. These environmental changes were often driven by necessity. More people meant more mouths to feed, and more mouths meant more farmland. The Austronesians were experts at terraforming their environments, but this often came at a cost. It's a classic tale of human innovation clashing with natural limits, a story as old as civilization itself. While the romantic notion of sustainable islanders living in harmony with nature is appealing, it's also a bit of a fairy tale. The Austronesians were as subject to the pressures of resource management as any society. They were creative and adaptable, but they weren't immune to the consequences of their actions. It's a reminder that sustainability is a balancing act, one that requires constant vigilance. Now, don't get me wrong, the Austronesians were masters at optimizing their resources, but sometimes their reach exceeded their grasp. Their story is one of ingenuity and adaptation, but also of challenges and hard-earned lessons. They were pioneers in every sense of the word, navigating not just the open seas but the complexities of human-environment interaction. And yet, for all their impact, the Austronesians left behind a legacy of enduring cultures and languages, a testament to their adaptability. Their innovations, like the crab claw sail, reshaped the maritime world, but their ecological footprint reminds us of the delicate balance between progress and preservation. As we sail further into the historical seas of the Austronesians, let's keep in mind that their story is both a cautionary tale and a celebration of human ingenuity. So, while the myth of the eco-friendly Austronesian might be more fantasy than fact, their real story is one of bold exploration and complex interactions with the environment. It's a narrative that resonates even today as we grapple with our own ecological challenges. The Austronesians were not just seafarers, they were players in a dramatic saga of survival, innovation, and sometimes ecological missteps. It's a story that's far from over, and one that we'll continue to unravel in our next chapter of exploration. As we sail further into the vast ocean of Austronesian history, it's time to anchor down on how these salty sea dogs not only mastered the waves, but also the art of social and political influence. First off, let's talk about chiefdoms. Think of them as the original corporate executives minus the boardroom, but with a lot more ceremonial headgear. These were societies where a chief, often a charismatic leader, held sway over resources and trade. And let's be clear, we're not talking about a quaint village headman. Oh no, this was more like a CEO of a major multinational, wielding power, influence, and, dare I say, a touch of flair. In fact, the influence of these chiefs stretched far and wide, so much so that their names and deeds became the stuff of legend. And just like any good CEO, they knew the importance of networking. Trading wasn't just about goods, it was about cementing alliances and strengthening political standing. But don't go thinking this was some kind of egalitarian paradise where everyone held hands and sang songs around the fire. The trade networks facilitated serious social stratification. The chiefs and their close circles, let's call them the board of directors, enjoyed the cream of the trade crop. We're talking about the best pottery, the sharpest obsidian, and yes, the juiciest pigs. Meanwhile, the average Joe, or in this case the average tupa, was more like the guy fetching coffee for the higher-ups. And here's where it gets even more interesting. These trade routes weren't just moving goods, they were moving ideas, languages, and cultural practices. Austronesian languages spread like wildfire, evolving and adapting as they hit new shores. But let's bust a myth here. The idea of a single, unchanging Austronesian culture is about as realistic as a pirate's treasure map. Regional variations were the name of the game. Each island, each chiefdom, had its own spin on the Austronesian lifestyle. From different dialects to unique pottery styles, they were more like a diverse family of cultures rather than a homogeneous block. The spread of language was a big deal. Today, there are around 1,100 Austronesian languages spoken from Madagascar to Hawaii. That's like a linguistic marathon across the globe. But this wasn't just about communication, it was a tool of power. Language facilitated trade negotiations, marriage alliances, and even the spread of religious beliefs. It was the social media of its day, connecting people across vast distances and diverse cultures. Let's not forget that these chiefdoms were also hotbeds of innovation. The need to manage resources and trade routes efficiently spurred developments in everything from agriculture to boat building. Some islands became centres of specialised production. For instance, the island of Yap in Micronesia became famous for its stone money, massive discs of carved limestone that were traded across the islands. Imagine lugging one of those to the market. Now, if you think these regional variations led to constant conflict, think again. While there were undoubtedly skirmishes, we're talking about human societies after all, trade networks often acted as a stabilizing force. The stakes were high, and maintaining a peaceful route was usually more lucrative than war. That's not to say they all sat around a table and signed peace treaties, but the Austronesians understood that a broken trade route was bad for business. So, while the tales of epic voyages and daring explorers make for great stories, the real heart of the Austronesian legacy lies in their social and political impact. They weren't just connecting dots on a map, they were weaving a complex tapestry of cultures, languages, and power structures that spanned continents. The Austronesians were not only masters of the sea, but also of the very human art of influence and adaptation. And with this intricate backdrop of social manoeuvring and cultural exchange, the world was set for even more dramatic shifts. As we continue to explore the Austronesian impact, remember that their legacy is not just in the lands they reached, but in the enduring influence they wielded over the very fabric of societies. So grab your metaphorical spyglass, because the next leg of this journey promises even more twists and turns. With the Austronesians already playing the ancient world's version of Monopoly, let's throw in a game-changing innovation, the crab claw sail. Picture a sail shaped like a crab's pincers, and you get the gist. Forget those sluggish square sails of yore. This was a sleek, aerodynamic marvel that made their boats faster and more maneuverable. It's like swapping out your family sedan for a sports car. This design wasn't just about speed, it was about control. It allowed these nautical navigators to tack against the wind with a finesse that would leave even seasoned sailors slack-jawed. The crab claw sail was the iPhone of its time, revolutionary, coveted, and a game-changer in maritime tech. These sails were crucial for navigating the trade winds that crisscrossed the Pacific and Indian Oceans. When you're dealing with distances that make a New York to LA road trip look like a jaunt to the local grocery store, every knot counts. And the Austronesians, with their crab claw sails billowing, could slice through waves like a chef through sashimi. This tech was no backyard innovation either. Its precision was the result of centuries of empirical know-how, passed down through generations like a family secret recipe. But while we're here marvelling at their technological prowess, let's address the elephant, or should I say the deforested island in the room. There's a tempting myth that the Austronesians were the ultimate eco-warriors, living in perfect harmony with nature. It's a nice thought, like imagining that your chocolate cake is calorie-free. But reality, as it so often does, has other ideas. Sure, they respected the sea, but their impact on land was less like a gentle footprint and more like a trampled garden. Take Easter Island, for example. Once a lush paradise, it became a cautionary tale of ecological overshoot. The island was originally covered in palm trees, many of which vanished due to the Austronesian penchant for grandiose statues and, ironically, more boats. Deforestation led to soil erosion and eventually agricultural collapse. By the time Europeans arrived, the island's ecosystem was a shadow of its former self. It's a sobering reminder that even the most resourceful societies can overextend their reach. And Easter Island wasn't an isolated case. Across the Pacific, Austronesians left their mark, sometimes quite literally. They cleared vast tracts of forest for agriculture, built artificial islands, and introduced non-native species like pigs and rats, which disrupted local ecologies. It's the ancient equivalent of bringing a couple of uninvited friends to a party and having them eat everything in sight. These environmental changes were often driven by necessity. More people meant more mouths to feed, and more mouths meant more farmland. The Austronesians were experts at terraforming their environments, but this often came at a cost. It's a classic tale of human innovation clashing with natural limits, a story as old as civilization itself. While the romantic notion of sustainable islanders living in harmony with nature is appealing, it's also a bit of a fairy tale. The Austronesians were as subject to the pressures of resource management as any society. They were creative and adaptable, but they weren't immune to the consequences of their actions. It's a reminder that sustainability is a balancing act, one that requires constant vigilance. Now, don't get me wrong, the Austronesians were masters at optimizing their resources, but sometimes their reach exceeded their grasp. Their story is one of ingenuity and adaptation, but also of challenges and hard-earned lessons. They were pioneers in every sense of the word, navigating not just the open seas, but the complexities of human-environment interaction. And yet, for all their impact, the Austronesians left behind a legacy of enduring cultures and languages, a testament to their adaptability. Their innovations, like the crab-claw sail, reshaped the maritime world, but their ecological footprint reminds us of the delicate balance between progress and preservation. As we sail further into the historical seas of the Austronesians, let's keep in mind that their story is both a cautionary tale and a celebration of human ingenuity. So, while the myth of the eco-friendly Austronesian might be more fantasy than fact, their real story is one of bold exploration and complex interactions with the environment. It's a narrative that resonates even today as we grapple with our own ecological challenges. The Austronesians were not just seafarers, they were players in a dramatic saga of survival, innovation, and sometimes ecological missteps. It's a story that's far from over, and one that will continue to unravel in our next chapter of exploration. As we conclude this epic voyage through Austronesian history, it's time to reflect on their enduring legacy. These maritime trailblazers didn't just navigate the seas, they charted the course for future generations in ways that continue to shape our world. Their influence on modern navigation techniques is undeniable. The star compass and other traditional navigation methods they developed have been studied by sailors and navigators across the globe. In fact, these ancient techniques have made a comeback in recent years as modern mariners seek to reconnect with the roots of navigation. But the Austronesians' contributions go beyond the realm of navigation. Their voyages laid the groundwork for cultural exchanges that have enriched societies around the world. They were the original globalizers, spreading languages, crops, and ideas across vast distances. The linguistic diversity of the Austronesian family is a testament to this, with around 1,200 languages still spoken today. It's like a linguistic tapestry that stretches from the shores of Madagascar to the islands of Hawaii, a vibrant reminder of their indelible mark on history. The allure of Austronesian voyages continues to captivate our imagination, balancing the romantic notion of adventurous explorers with the practical realities of economic pursuits. Their stories are a blend of myth and reality, but it's important to separate fact from fiction to truly appreciate their impact. While it's tempting to romanticize their voyages as purely exploratory adventures, the truth is far more nuanced. They were savvy traders and skilled navigators whose journeys were driven by the pursuit of economic opportunity and cultural exchange. In the end, the Austronesians remind us of the power of human ingenuity and adaptability. Their legacy is a testament to the spirit of exploration and innovation that continues to drive us today. As we navigate our own challenges and chart new courses in an ever-changing world, we can draw inspiration from the Austronesians' remarkable story. They were the architects of a connected world, and their impact is still felt in the languages we speak, the foods we eat, and the cultures we celebrate. So, as we wrap up our journey through the fascinating world of Austronesian maritime trade, let's raise a metaphorical toast to these intrepid seafarers. Their story is one of adventure, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. It's a story worth remembering as we continue to explore the vast seas of history and the currents of our common humanity. You wake up to the creaking sound of the wooden shutters being opened, letting in the pale morning light of 14th century China. As a Ming Dynasty scholar, your day begins not with a leisurely breakfast in bed, but with the stern embrace of your daily rituals. Forget the romanticized image of a calm, contemplative life filled with poetic musings under a cherry blossom tree. Instead, think of a life that's more akin to being a high-stakes contestant on an ancient game show, where the prize isn't $1,000,000 but the coveted status of scholar official. The stakes? Everything. You splash water on your face from a wooden basin, the coolness snapping you into the reality of your role. The Ming Dynasty, having kicked off in 1368, is obsessed with education like a modern-day teenager is with the latest smartphone. And why wouldn't it be? Education is the golden ticket to social mobility, a chance to ascend the ladder from your humble beginnings to the upper echelons of the imperial bureaucracy. It's a lottery you play with ink and paper, not numbers. The imperial examination system, the Gaokao of its time, is the ultimate gladiatorial arena for the mind. It's been around since the Sui dynasty, but the Ming folks have perfected it into a grueling ordeal lasting several days. It's like running a marathon, only the sore muscles are in your brain. The exams demand you to spew knowledge on Confucian classics, history, poetry, and governance. And let's not forget the 8-legged essay, a rigid format that makes modern standardized tests look like child's play. It's not just about what you know, it's about how well you can contort your thoughts into this literary pretzel. As you dress in your scholar's robes, no casual Friday here, every day is formal. You mentally prepare for the day ahead. The robes, flowing and elegant, are a symbol of your status and aspirations. But they're also a reminder of the weight on your shoulders, a constant itch of expectation and obligation. You're not just representing yourself, you're the face of your family's hopes and dreams. No pressure. Education in this era is a serious business. It's not just about personal enlightenment or intellectual curiosity. It's about survival, prestige, and power. The government pours resources into this system because it's a tool to create loyal, educated officials who will serve the emperor's interests. It's a social contract. You get status and stability, and in return you uphold the state's Confucian ideals. It's a neat trick, keeping the machine of bureaucracy well oiled with the hopes and dreams of countless scholars like you. You head to the study hall, where the air is thick with the scent of ink and paper. There's no room for error here. Every character you write, every argument you craft, is a step toward or away from your future. The room buzzes with a quiet intensity. The only sounds the scratch of brushes on paper and the occasional cough. This is where you'll spend most of your day, hunched over your desk, eyes strained from deciphering texts, hoping that your efforts will pay off in the form of a passing score. But let's burst that bubble of scholarly serenity. The reality is far from idyllic. The pressure is relentless. The expectations as heavy as the Great Wall. Failure is not an option, but it's statistically more likely. Only a minuscule fraction of candidates will succeed. Some sources suggest only about 2 to 10% pass the provincial exams, and even fewer make it through the higher levels. It's a brutal funnel, designed to filter out all but the most determined and, let's face it, the most fortunate. You pause for a moment to rub your temples, a futile attempt to stave off the headache brewing from hours of study. The romantic notion of the scholar's life quickly fades when faced with the stark reality of long hours, mental exhaustion, and the constant threat of failure. The cultural obsession with scholarly achievement is a double-edged sword. It's a source of pride, but it's also a relentless taskmaster, demanding perfection at every turn. And yet, here you are, part of this grand tradition, a cog in the vast machine of the Ming Dynasty. As you dive back into your studies, you can't help but wonder if future generations will look back on this era with the same rose-tinted glasses, envisioning a life of serene wisdom while conveniently ignoring the sweat and tears that paved the way. By midday, you break for a modest meal. There's no feast here, just a simple bowl of rice and vegetables, sustenance to fuel your overworked brain. As you eat, you reflect on the irony of your situation. You're caught in a system where the pursuit of knowledge is both liberating and confining. You're striving for a life that promises honor and respect, yet the path to get there is fraught with stress and sacrifice. As the sun reaches its zenith, you know there's no time to waste. The afternoon will be filled with more of the same, writing, memorizing, and reciting, honing your skills in the hopes of standing out among the throngs of other scholars. It's a competition as fierce as any battlefield, only the weapons are wit and wisdom. This is your life, and every day is a reminder that the path of a scholar in the Ming Dynasty is as much about perseverance as it is about intellect. As the shadows lengthen and the day begins to wane, you steel yourself for the evening's tasks, knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same. The life of a scholar is not for the faint of heart, and as you prepare to return to your studies, you can't help but chuckle at the idea that the life of a Ming Dynasty scholar is anything but serene. It's a hard-fought journey, but one that holds the promise of a future filled with possibility, if you can endure the trials along the way. As the evening air cools the heat of the day, you make your way toward the marketplace, that chaotic heart of commerce in the Ming Dynasty. Here, beneath the bustling canopies and amidst the cacophony of bartering, is where the real action happens. Forget the romantic image of ancient China, all placid tea ceremonies and serene landscapes. The marketplace is where the rubber meets the road, or, more accurately, where copper meets the palm. Now let's talk about the coins jangling in your pouch. They're not just any coins, they're the copper cash that fuels the empire's economy. Each coin has a square hole in the middle, perfect for stringing together like a medieval change purse. These coins are the unsung heroes of the Ming economy, each one worth a fraction of a tael, the silver standard that officially greases the wheels of trade. But in everyday life, it's copper that dominates, a reminder that currency is as much about psychology as it is about metal content. The marketplace is a riot of sights and sounds, vendors hawking everything from silk to spices, each shouting louder than the next in a relentless quest for attention. It's like a medieval version of a social media feed, but with fewer memes and more bargaining. Trade is the lifeblood here, a vibrant tapestry woven from local goods and exotic imports. If you squint past the clamour, you might catch a glimpse of the Silk Road's legacy, that ancient network of trade routes that brought not just goods, but ideas, religions, and even diseases across continents. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. Behind the romantic notion of bustling trade lies a harsh economic reality. The Ming Dynasty, despite its splendour, wrestled continually with political infighting and fiscal strain. The treasury was often emptier than a scholar's stomach after a day of exams. Natural disasters, like floods and droughts, could cripple the agrarian economy faster than you could say Confucius. In a bid to stabilize the economy, the government flirted with the idea of paper money. Yes, paper money invention credits go to the Song Dynasty, but the Ming embraced it like a new trend, hoping it would be the economic panacea they desperately needed. Printed with auspicious symbols and official seals, these paper notes were meant to alleviate the strain on the silver supply. But here's the kicker. The government printed so much of it that inflation skyrocketed, and soon the notes were worth less than the paper they were printed on. People quickly lost faith in this monetary experiment, preferring the reassuring clink of metal. It's a classic case of a good idea gone awry, like every diet plan that promises you'll lose weight while eating cake. The Ming's paper money fiasco is a cautionary tale of economic mismanagement, one that proves even the best intentions can lead to disastrous outcomes if not handled wisely. But let's pivot back to the marketplace, where the tangible goods are as diverse as the people selling them. You've got your farmers with baskets of fresh produce, artisans showcasing their latest creations, and merchants with luxurious silks that shimmer in the sun. It's a sensory overload, a vibrant reminder that trade is not just about goods but about connections. Each transaction is a small thread in the vast tapestry of the Ming economy. Still, it's not all sunshine and prosperity. The government keeps a tight grip on trade, regulating everything from prices to the movement of goods. This control is meant to prevent chaos, but often leads to corruption and inefficiency. The tax collectors, nicknamed the empire's necessary evil, are as much a part of the marketplace as the vendors. They're the party guests. No one wants, but everyone has to tolerate. The reality is, maintaining a stable economy in the Ming Dynasty is as complex as the imperial bureaucracy itself. Political pressures are like the unpredictable weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, and always capable of turning a good harvest into a fiscal nightmare. The emperor may sit on a throne, but his economy is perched precariously on a tightrope, swaying with every breeze of political change. Yet, despite these challenges, there's an undeniable allure to the marketplace. It's a living, breathing entity, a microcosm of the empire's strengths and weaknesses. As you navigate through the throng of buyers and sellers, you can't help but marvel at the sheer resilience of it all. The marketplace is more than an economic hub. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of a civilization that thrived on ingenuity and adaptability. As dusk settles, the marketplace begins to wind down, the day's unsold goods packed away for another attempt tomorrow. You head home, your pouch lighter, but your mind buzzing with the day's exchanges. The harsh realities behind the romanticized scenes are laid bare, but they only add depth to the story of the Ming Dynasty. It's a tale of ambition and adversity, where the promise of prosperity is always just one good harvest away. In the quiet of the evening, as you prepare to return to your studies, the memory of the marketplace lingers. It's a reminder that the scholar's life is intertwined with the world beyond ink and paper. Economic stability, like academic success, requires balance, foresight, and sometimes a little luck. The Ming marketplace, in all its chaotic glory, is a testament to these truths, a world where copper coins and paper dreams collide, and where the pulse of a dynasty can be felt in every transaction. As you leave the marketplace, the clang of copper coins still echoing in your ears, you head towards a gathering of fellow scholars, a sort of intellectual potluck where everyone brings their own brand of philosophical casserole. Think of it as a 14th century TED Talk, minus the laser pointers and PowerPoint slides. Here, in the shaded courtyard of a local academy, you'll dive into the cerebral whirlpool of political philosophies and governmental decrees, armed with nothing but your wits and a healthy dose of skepticism. Now, let's get one thing straight. These discussions are more than just highbrow gossip sessions. In the Ming Dynasty, scholars are the brain trust of the empire, the ones tasked with interpreting Confucian ideals and translating them into practical policy. It's like trying to turn a haiku into a user manual, elegant but not always straightforward. Today's topic? The latest decree from the imperial court, a document so verbose it could double as a doorstop. The emperor has proposed a new land tax to bolster state revenues. On paper, it sounds like a reasonable plan. After all, the empire's coffers aren't exactly overflowing. But here's the kicker. The implementation is as clear as mud. The decree is riddled with ambiguities, leaving local officials scratching their heads and farmers grumbling into their rice bowls. As you and your fellow scholars unpack the decree, the conversation inevitably drifts to the tension between Confucian ideals and realpolitik. Confucius, bless his sage heart, had a lot to say about morality and governance, but not much about navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of Ming administration. It's as if the emperor decided to play a game of chess using checkers rules, confusing at best, chaotic at worst. In theory, Confucianism emphasizes benevolent governance, where rulers lead by moral example and everyone lives in harmonious order. In practice, well, let's just say the reality is a bit more Machiavellian. The Ming bureaucracy is a sprawling beast with layers of officials, each more concerned with self-preservation than with altruistic ideals. It's a system that rewards cunning as much as competence, where political maneuvering is as common as the morning mist. Take the scholar officials, for example. They're supposed to be paragons of virtue, the moral compass of the empire. But let's not kid ourselves. Behind those serene facades lies a world of scheming and backdoor deals. The myth of the incorruptible scholar is as fanciful as a dragon in your backyard. Sure, there are those who genuinely uphold Confucian principles, but for every idealist there's a pragmatist ready to bend the rules when it suits them. Here's a fun fact for you, the Ming administration. In all its glory, employed more than 20,000 officials at the provincial level. That's a lot of cooks in the imperial kitchen, each with their own recipe for governance. With such a vast bureaucracy, it's no wonder corruption creeps in like a shadow at dusk. Bribery, nepotism and favoritism are the unsavory side dishes to the main course of governance. But hold on, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Despite its flaws, the bureaucracy does have its merits. It's a system that, when it works, can maintain stability and order across an empire stretching over 6.5 million square kilometers. That's no small feat, especially when you consider the logistical challenges of communicating across such a vast territory. As the discussion deepens, the conversation turns to the role of scholars in shaping policy. Here's where the rubber really meets the road. Scholars are the bridge between theory and practice, tasked with advising the emperor and his court on matters of state. It's a delicate dance, balancing Confucian ideals with the harsh realities of political life. Too much idealism, and you risk becoming irrelevant. Too much pragmatism, and you might end up on the wrong side of history. Or worse, on the wrong side of the emperor's temper. It's a job that requires a deft hand and a sharp mind, much like the artisans crafting intricate jade carvings. You're shaping the future with every word, every decision, every debate. And yet, it's a thankless task, one where success is often measured in the absence of failure rather than in accolades. As the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you can't help but reflect on the irony of it all. The life of a scholar, so often romanticized, is a constant balancing act. You're caught between the lofty ideals of Confucianism and the gritty reality of political life, between the myth of the incorruptible scholar and the truth of human nature. And yet, despite the challenges, there's something undeniably alluring about this life. Perhaps it's the intellectual camaraderie, the thrill of debate, or the promise of shaping the destiny of an empire. Whatever it is, it's enough to keep you coming back, day after day, to these gatherings, these discussions, these moments where ideas are born and history is made. As the conversation begins to wind down, you know that the day's debates will linger in your mind long after you leave the courtyard. They're a reminder that the life of a scholar is one of constant questioning, where answers are elusive and the journey is as important as the destination. And tomorrow, as the sun rises once more over the empire, you'll return to this world of ideas, ready to tackle whatever challenges the day may bring. In the meantime, there's still work to be done. The empire never sleeps, and neither does the pursuit of knowledge. So, you gather your thoughts, your notes, and your resolve, and head back to your studies, ready to face whatever the future holds. The life of a Ming Dynasty scholar may be anything but serene, but it's a journey worth taking, one day at a time. As you head back to your studies, the ink-stained desk awaits with its usual camaraderie of scrolls and brushes. But this afternoon, your focus isn't solely on the labyrinthine bureaucracy or the latest imperial decrees. Instead, you're diving into the seductive world of cultural practices and artistic expressions, a realm where scholars like you are both creators and curators, not just of policy, but of beauty. Now, before you start picturing a tranquil scene of artistic bliss, let's set the record straight. You're not lounging in a silken robe, sipping tea while composing your latest masterpiece under the dappled shade of a willow tree. The reality is far more complex and, dare I say, a bit more cutthroat. Sure, calligraphy and poetry are the lifeblood of the scholarly class, but they're also competitive sports where the stakes are as high as any imperial exam. Let's start with calligraphy, often hailed as the highest form of Chinese art. To outsiders, it might look like a series of elegant brushstrokes, but to the trained eye, each stroke is a testament to discipline, creativity, and a fair bit of social maneuvering. You see, in 14th century China, your reputation as a scholar isn't just built on your ability to quote Confucius or analyze governmental policy. It's also about how well you can wield a brush. A scholar's calligraphy is like their personal brand. It speaks volumes about their intellect and refinement. But here's the twist. While you might imagine scholars effortlessly gliding their brushes across paper, creating characters that practically sing, the truth is that mastering calligraphy is a grind. It's said that Wang Shiji, the legendary calligrapher of the Jin dynasty, practiced so much that he turned an entire pond black with ink. The pressure to achieve such mastery is immense, and for good reason. A single piece of calligraphy can serve as your resume, your letter of introduction, and your artistic legacy, all rolled into one scroll. And then there's poetry, the other side of this artistic coin. If calligraphy is the art of the hand, poetry is the art of the heart. Scholars are expected to be adept poets, weaving words into verses that capture the subtleties of human experience. Poetry is the lingua franca of the educated elite, a means of communication that transcends the mundane. In fact, during the Ming Dynasty, poetry was so integral to scholar culture that it was included in the imperial examinations. Imagine that, high-stakes poetry slammed centuries before they became trendy in coffee shops. But let's bust a myth. Not every scholar is a natural-born poet. The romantic image of the scholar-poet is as elusive as a mirage on a hot day. Sure, some have the gift of gab, able to churn out couplets that would make even the most stoic Confucian cracker smile. For others, composing poetry is like pulling teeth, painful and best avoided. Yet, the social pressure to participate is immense, driven by the need to display one's erudition and cultural sophistication. And here's where things get interesting. While it's easy to picture these scholars as patrons of the arts, lounging in well-appointed studies, the reality is that many faced significant financial constraints. The life of a scholar wasn't always as lucrative as one might think. Sure, a prestigious position in the bureaucracy could bring wealth, but until then many scholars lived modestly, their artistic pursuits funded by the occasional patron or the sale of their own work. Consider the tale of Tang Yin, the Ming Dynasty's quintessential scholar-artist. Renowned for his brilliant paintings and poetry, Tang Yin was also a victim of his own reputation. Despite his artistic genius, he struggled financially, often painting to support himself. A stark reminder that artistic talent doesn't always translate to financial success. He drifted from patron to patron, his life a patchwork of brilliance and hardship, proving that even the most celebrated figures had to hustle for their supper. In this environment, the arts were as much a means of survival as they were a form of expression. Scholars turned to calligraphy and poetry not just for personal fulfillment, but as a way to gain favour, earn a living, and carve out a niche in the crowded world of academia. It was a delicate balance between passion and pragmatism, where the brush and the pen were tools of both art and commerce. As you practice your own calligraphy, the brush gliding across the paper with practiced precision, you can't help but marvel at the dual nature of these artistic pursuits. They're both a respite from the rigours of scholarly life and a reflection of its pressures. Every stroke is a blend of tradition and innovation, every poem a dialogue between the past and present. But let's not forget the bigger picture. These artistic expressions are more than just personal achievements. They're a thread in the vast tapestry of Ming culture, a testament to the dynasty's enduring legacy of intellectual and artistic excellence. Through their art, scholars not only contributed to the cultural richness of their time, but also shaped the very identity of their civilization. As the afternoon wears on, the sun casting long shadows across your desk, you feel a sense of connection to this lineage of scholar artists. You're part of a grand tradition, one where the pursuit of beauty and knowledge is intertwined, where the pen and the brush are as mighty as the sword. It's a journey of discovery, a quest for meaning, and a reminder that the life of a scholar is as much about creation as it is about contemplation. And so, as you set aside your brush and gather your thoughts, you prepare for the next chapter in this ongoing saga. The day isn't over yet, and there are still lessons to learn, insights to uncover, and mysteries to explore. The life of a Ming Dynasty scholar is one of perpetual discovery, a dance between past and present, a testament to the power of the human spirit to seek out beauty and truth in every stroke, every word, every moment. As dusk approaches, you know that the evening will bring new challenges and opportunities, a continuation of the story that began with the first light of dawn. It's a tale of perseverance and passion, of intellect and imagination, and it's one you're proud to be a part of. The life of a scholar may not be easy, but it's a journey worth taking, a journey that continues one day at a time. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across your ink-stained desk, it's time to pause and reflect on the long arc of history you've been a part of. The life of a Ming Dynasty scholar is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, intellect, and, let's be honest, a fair amount of stress-induced caffeine consumption. But what about the legacy of these scholars? How did their contributions shape the China we know today? and what myths about their wisdom need a reality check? First, let's talk about contributions. The Ming scholars were like the Swiss Army knife of the dynasty, versatile, multifaceted, and indispensable. They were the architects of governance, the scribes of history, and the curators of culture. Their fingerprints are all over the Ming dynasty's achievements, from the construction of the Forbidden City to the expansion of the Great Wall. You could say they were the original multitaskers, juggling duties that would make even the most seasoned project manager break into a cold sweat. One of the most enduring legacies is the civil service examination system, that rigorous gauntlet of intellect and endurance. It wasn't just a means of selecting the best and brightest, it was the great equalizer, offering a path to power based on merit rather than birthright. In a world where nepotism was as common as rice in a bowl, this was revolutionary. The system persisted for nearly 1,300 years, influencing not only Chinese governance, but also the bureaucracies of neighboring countries. Talk about a long-lasting impact. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of a hit single that tops the charts for centuries. But while the examination system was a beacon of meritocracy, it wasn't without flaws. For one, it was heavily biased towards Confucian classics, which meant that scholars were more philosopher kings in training than practical administrators. The exams demanded rote memorization over critical thinking, an approach that might produce excellent debaters but not necessarily effective governors. Imagine running a Fortune 500 company with a board of directors who could quote Shakespeare but struggled with spreadsheets. You get the picture. Now, let's address the myth of the infallible scholar. The romanticized image of the wise, incorruptible scholar official is as much a work of fiction as any fantasy novel. Sure, there were those who lived up to this ideal, paragons of virtue and intellect, but the reality was often murkier. Scholars were human after all, prone to the same vices and ambitions as anyone else. The bureaucracy was rife with corruption, favoritism, and political scheming. For every Zhu Xi, the revered philosopher who epitomized scholarly integrity, there was a bureaucrat more interested in personal gain than public service. This human side of the scholar class is perhaps the most sobering aspect of their legacy. It's a reminder that the pursuit of wisdom doesn't inoculate one against the temptations of power. Even the most enlightened individuals can become ensnared by the very systems they seek to uphold. It's a tale as old as time, really, a classic case of the fox guarding the henhouse. But let's not forget the cultural impact of these scholars, which is as significant as their political contributions. From literature to art, the Ming scholars helped shape a cultural renaissance that left an indelible mark on Chinese civilization. They were custodians of tradition, but also innovators who pushed the boundaries of artistic expression. The legacy of this cultural flowering is evident in the enduring popularity of Ming porcelain, the quintessential blue and white ceramics that are as iconic as they are exquisite. And then there's the philosophical legacy. Confucianism, with its emphasis on morality, social harmony, and hierarchical order, became the bedrock of Chinese society thanks in no small part to the scholars who championed its teachings. Even today, Confucian values continue to influence Chinese culture and politics, providing a moral compass in a rapidly changing world. It's a testament to the enduring power of ideas, proving that the pen really is mightier than the sword, or at least as mighty as the brush. As you sit in the dimming light, you can't help but marvel at the dual nature of this legacy, one part idealism, one part realpolitik. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white, it's a spectrum of greys, a complex interplay of ambition, intellect, and human frailty. The scholars of the Ming Dynasty were no different, navigating a world of contradictions with the tools they had, wisdom, wit, and a fair amount of ink. So, what's the takeaway for those of us looking back from the vantage point of the 21st century? Perhaps it's this. The legacy of the Ming scholars is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the human spirit. Their contributions are a reminder that even in a world fraught with challenges, the pursuit of wisdom is a journey worth undertaking. And while the path may be fraught with pitfalls, the rewards, both personal and societal, are worth the effort. In the quiet of the evening, as you prepare to retire for the night, the enormity of this legacy settles over you like a comforting blanket. The life of a scholar is one of perpetual discovery, a journey that transcends time and space, connecting you to a lineage of thinkers who dared to dream big, even in the face of adversity. And as you close your eyes, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new lessons to be learned. The life of a Ming Dynasty scholar may not have been the romantic idyll often imagined, but it was a journey of significance, a testament to the power of the human spirit to strive for greatness, one brushstroke at a time. As the night envelops the world in its embrace, you drift into a dream-filled sleep, ready to continue this grand adventure when the morning light beckons once more. In the grand theatre of ancient maritime history, the Phoenicians were the starship troopers of the Mediterranean. These folks weren't just building ships, they were crafting floating poems that sailed their way through the pages of history. Nestled in the snug embrace of the eastern Mediterranean's narrow coastline, these seafaring virtuosos hailed from city-states like Tyre and Sidon, places that sound like they should be headlining a fantasy novel, but were very much real and crucial to their nautical narrative. Let's get one thing straight. Being a Phoenician meant being born into a world where land was as scarce as a polite debate on Twitter. Imagine trying to build a civilization on a slip of land so thin it makes a pencil look chubby. This geographical squeeze play wasn't a problem, it was a catalyst. With mountains at their backs, and the sea stretching out before them like an open invitation, the Phoenicians turned to the water with the kind of fervour that would make a modern tech startup look like a knitting circle. They weren't just paddling around the neighbourhood pond, these people were zigzagging across the Mediterranean like it was their own personal highway. Why stick to dry land when the sea could offer a cornucopia of possibilities? This wasn't just a case of wanderlust, it was economics with a splash of adventure. The Phoenicians recognized that the sea was their ticket to the big leagues, and they weren't about to let it slip through their fingers like sand. They didn't just build vessels, they engineered them with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Their ships had curves that could rival a sports car, with designs so advanced it makes you wonder if they had some kind of ancient CAD software tucked away somewhere. The secret sauce to their shipbuilding mastery was their home turf. With the lush cedar forests of Lebanon just a short trek away, they had access to some of the best timber in the ancient world. These cedars weren't just any old trees. They were massive, towering giants, the kind you might expect to find in an ancient version of a lumberjack's fever dream. This wood was the backbone, literally, of their shipbuilding industry, allowing the Phoenicians to construct sturdy, seaworthy vessels that could withstand the tempests of the open sea. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Phoenicians weren't just out there for the love of the game. They had trade ambitions as expansive as their nautical roots. They were the unsung merchants of the Mediterranean, bringing goods like glass, textiles, and the famous Tyrian purple dye made from the murex snail, and so costly that it was basically the Gucci of ancient dyes, to far-flung markets. Trade wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline, transforming their narrow strip of land into a bustling hub of commerce and culture. And let's talk about those legendary tales of Phoenician seafaring prowess. Oh, the stories! If you believe everything you hear, you'd think these guys were the original pirates of the Mediterranean, swashbuckling through the waters with a parrot on their shoulders. Sure, they were skilled navigators, but let's sprinkle a little reality into that narrative. The Phoenicians were pragmatic traders, not Hollywood buccaneers. The sea was their workplace, not a set for high seas drama. Despite this, their feats weren't without flair. According to Herodotus, they might have been the first to circumnavigate Africa long before the age of GPS and Google Maps. Skeptics might raise an eyebrow. How could they possibly manage that without modern technology? But then again, these were the same folks who figured out how to use the stars and the sun to guide their journeys, effectively turning the sky into a celestial GPS system. It's the kind of ingenuity that makes you wonder if ancient Phoenicians would have been the ones to invent the smartphone if they had just a bit more time. But before we get too carried away with tales of their maritime marvels, it's worth pausing to consider the gritty realities that often get glossed over. The Phoenician cities weren't exactly peaceful utopias. They were competitive urban centres constantly jockeying for position, both with each other and with external powers like the Egyptians and the Assyrians. This wasn't just a casual rivalry, it was a high-stakes Game of Thrones with trade routes and naval supremacy as the ultimate prizes. In this world, innovation wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. So, As we embark on this journey through the annals of Phoenician shipbuilding, let's keep our eyes peeled for both the dazzling legends and the gritty truths. Because if there's one thing the Phoenicians teach us, it's that history is as much about the stories we tell as the realities we uncover. And in the case of these ancient maritime maestros, both are equally compelling. The Phoenicians, those savvy seafarers, were not just about swinging from one Mediterranean port to another. Let's dive deeper into the nitty-gritty of how these ancient shipbuilders translated visions into vessels, navigating not just waters, but also the very real economic currents of their time. Their shipbuilding was a bit like mixing a craft beer complex, artisanal and requiring just the right ingredients. First up, the materials. The Phoenicians had a not-so-secret weapon, the mighty cedar forests of Lebanon. These trees weren't just tall, they were timber titans, reaching heights of 130 feet, with trunks so wide you could hide behind them during a game of hide-and-seek. Cedar was the gold standard for shipbuilding, prized for its resistance to rot and its aromatic qualities, which probably made those long sea voyages slightly more bearable. But cutting down these giant timber towers was no walk in the park. It was labour-intensive and dangerous, requiring not just brawn but brains. Timber was felled by skilled workers using iron axes, no chainsaws here folks, and then dragged by oxen or floated down rivers like some ancient log flume ride. The logistics of transporting these cedar colossi were a nightmare that would make any project manager break into a cold sweat. Picture this: rough, mountainous terrain and no paved roads, just narrow, winding paths. A single long cedar log could weigh several tons, and moving it wasn't as simple as putting it in the back of a pickup truck. This was a full-on operation involving teams of workers, animals, and a good dose of ancient ingenuity. The wood then had to be shaped and assembled into ships in coastal shipyards that were the beating hearts of Phoenician cities. These shipyards were bustling hubs of activity, a bit like a Silicon Valley startup, but with more sawdust and fewer PowerPoint presentations. But let's not gloss over the costs. Building a Phoenician ship was as expensive as it was ambitious. The labour alone was a hefty investment. Skilled shipwrights were highly sought after, and their expertise didn't come cheap. And then there were the raw materials. Cedar wasn't the only wood used. Oak and pine were also incorporated for different parts of the ship, each selected for its specific qualities. The sails, made from linen or papyrus, were another expense, as was the rope made from flax or hemp. This wasn't a DIY backyard project. It was a full-scale industrial enterprise. And here's where it gets economically juicy. The Phoenicians weren't just building ships for kicks. They were constructing the vessels that would carry their economy. Each ship was a floating investment, a stock portfolio on water. The upfront costs were significant, but the potential returns were enormous. A successful trading voyage could yield profits that would make a venture capitalist drool. Selling Tyrian purple dye, glassware, and other luxury goods brought back wealth that funded even more shipbuilding, creating a cycle of investment and return that fueled the Phoenicians' maritime supremacy. Sure, it's tempting to imagine the Phoenicians as perpetually rolling in ancient currency, but here's the reality check. They weren't immune to economic downturns. Each voyage carried risks, storms, piracy, or the occasional hostile takeover by rival city-states. A ship lost at sea was not just a physical loss but a financial catastrophe. This was high-stakes commerce, where the Mediterranean was both a highway and a minefield. The legend of the Phoenicians as endlessly wealthy traders is just that, a legend. Yes, they were economically savvy, but they were also savvy because they had to be. Their wealth was hard-earned, not handed to them on a silver platter. They navigated a complex web of trade agreements, alliances, and rivalries, all while keeping an eye on the bottom line. They were the ancient world's equivalent of Wall Street traders, complete with the same mix of ambition, innovation, and occasional recklessness. In this high-stakes game of maritime monopoly, the Phoenicians were not just players, they were the ones writing the rules. Yet this wasn't just about business acumen, it was about survival. With limited arable land and powerful neighbours, the sea was their salvation. They turned the Mediterranean into their own marketplace, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. As we continue to unravel the story of Phoenician shipbuilding, remember that these ancient mariners were more than their legend. They were craftspeople, business people, and above all, pragmatists who understood the sea was both a challenge and an opportunity. They didn't just dream of sailing the seas, they built the ships that made those dreams a reality, and as we will see, their story is far from over. So, let's dive into what made Phoenician ships the ancient equivalent of a Tesla on the high seas. These weren't your run-of-the-mill dinghies, they were technological wonders that had sailors across the Mediterranean drooling with envy. First off, let's talk about the so-called gopher wood. No, it wasn't a tree that would spit out a gopher every time you chopped it down. In fact, the term gopher wood is one of history's little mysteries, a biblical reference that has kept scholars scratching their heads for centuries. Some believe it was a type of resinous wood, while others suspect it was code for specially treated timber. Whatever it was, it added another layer of durability to their ships, making them the Sherman tanks of their day. But the real showstopper was the mortise and tenon joints. If you've ever assembled an IKEA bookshelf without losing your sanity, you'll appreciate the brilliance of this technique. Imagine fitting together wooden pegs and slots so perfectly that they could withstand the wild tantrums of the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't just carpentry, it was shipbuilding wizardry. These joints held the planks together with such precision that you'd think they had a time-travelling medieval engineer on their team. The result? Ships as tight as a drum, ready to brave the waves and outlast the competition. Now, let's talk about the hull, the sleek, aerodynamic body of the ship that cut through water like a hot knife through butter. Phoenician shipbuilders didn't just slap a few planks together and call it a day. They meticulously designed their ships with a keen understanding of hydrodynamics that would make even a modern naval architect nod in respect. They employed a keel, a central spine running along the bottom of the ship that provided stability and direction. This wasn't just a luxury feature, it was a necessity for navigating the often unpredictable Mediterranean waters. The sails were another area where the Phoenicians showed off their innovation chops. They used square sails that caught the wind with a kind of enthusiasm you'd expect from a kid on a sugar high. These sails allowed their ships to harness the power of the wind, propelling them forward with speed and efficiency. In a world where rowing was often the only alternative, being able to sail meant conserving manpower and increasing the range of their voyages. It's like swapping out your old gas guzzler for a shiny new electric car, except instead of saving on gas, you're saving on muscle power. And let's not forget the famous Phoenician bireme, a two-tiered rowing galley that was the sports car of its time. With 2 rows of oars stacked like a double-decker bus, these ships could achieve impressive speeds, making them perfect for both trade and warfare. The addition of a bronze-tipped ram on the prow turned these vessels into formidable naval weapons, capable of slicing through enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. This was ancient maritime multitasking at its finest, part cargo ship, part battleship, all business. Yet, despite all this innovation, the Phoenicians weren't content to rest on their laurels. No, they had an ancient PR machine to feed, and feed it they did. Tales of their ship's prowess were spun into legends. You'd think these vessels could practically fly the way they were talked up. Sure, they were fast, but let's inject a little reality. They weren't exactly breaking the sound barrier. The average speed of a Phoenician merchant ship was about 4 to 5 knots, or roughly 5 to 6 miles per hour. A brisk walking pace for us landlubbers. Not bad for the time, but not exactly warp speed. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion of Phoenician ships as unsinkable juggernauts. Sure, they were sturdy, but they weren't invincible. Storms could still turn them into kindling, and pirates were a constant threat. These ships didn't have the luxury of modern sonar or weather forecasts. Navigating the high seas was as much about luck as it was about skill. A sudden squall could send even the most well-crafted ship to Davy Jones's locker. All this talk of shipbuilding and sea voyages might make it sound like the Phoenicians were living a life of luxury on the high seas, but the reality was more like an ancient episode of Survivor. Life on board was cramped and uncomfortable, with sailors packed in like sardines. The diet was a monotonous blend of dried fish and hardtack, the ancient equivalent of astronaut food. Seasickness was a constant companion, and fresh water was a precious commodity. So, while the ships themselves were engineering marvels, life on board was far from glamorous. But for the Phoenicians, these hardships were simply the cost of doing business. They didn't sail the seas for the thrill of adventure, they did it because the rewards were worth the risk. Each successful voyage brought back goods that could be traded for a handsome profit, fueling their economy and keeping their shipyards humming. This wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving in a world where the sea was both a barrier and a bridge. In the grand tapestry of history, the Phoenician ships were more than just vessels. They were the lifelines of an ancient civilization that understood the value of innovation and adaptability. These ships were a testament to the Phoenician spirit, a blend of practicality and daring that allowed them to navigate the complexities of their world with aplomb. As we continue to explore the story of Phoenician shipbuilding, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, where new adventures and challenges await. There's still much more to uncover about these ancient mariners and their incredible legacy. So, buckle up and prepare to set sail on the next leg of our journey through the annals of history. The seas may be uncharted, but the story is far from over. As we keep our eyes on the horizon, let's pivot from the salty spray of the high seas to the bustling ports where Phoenician ships played the role of both workhorse and cultural envoy. These weren't just cargo carriers. They were the ancient world's equivalent of LinkedIn, connecting cultures, spreading ideas, and occasionally sparking a rivalry or two. To understand the full scope of Phoenician influence, you've got to appreciate their knack for networking. They weren't just shipping goods, they were exporting cultures. Imagine these ships as floating bazaars, carrying not just the famous Tyrian purple dye, but also innovations, religious beliefs, and artistic styles. Think of them as ancient influencers, peddling everything from Egyptian papyrus to Cypriot copper, all while giving a cultural shout-out to the various ports they visited. If there had been an ancient Yelp, the Phoenicians would have had rave reviews for bringing exotic goods and ideas to every corner of the Mediterranean. But let's not sail into the mythological sunset just yet. The Phoenicians weren't just benevolent cultural ambassadors. No, they were savvy operators, playing a high-stakes game of trade chess where every move mattered. Their trade networks were like a web of ancient intrigue, weaving through alliances and rivalries with the deftness of a seasoned diplomat. They weren't just friendly traders, they were strategic players in a geopolitical game where knowledge was power and secrecy was often the best policy. Now, about that cloak and dagger reputation. The Phoenicians were said to be secretive about their trade routes, guarding them like a dragon guards its hoard. Some historians suggest they were the original purveyors of corporate espionage, keeping trade secrets under wraps to maintain their competitive edge. Did they really go around whispering in hushed tones and lurking in shadows? Probably not with quite so much drama. But they did have a vested interest in keeping competitors guessing. In a world where the right trade route could mean the difference between prosperity and poverty, the stakes were as high as Zeus on a thundercloud. And speaking of secrecy, let's address the elephant in the room, the idea that the Phoenicians were shrouded in mystery, their ships disappearing into the mists of time like some ancient stealth vessels. The truth? They were as mysterious as a celebrity's Instagram feed, only as secretive as they needed to be to stay ahead. Sure, they kept their cards close to their chest, but it was more about prudent business practices than fostering a sense of enigma. After all, why give away the recipe to your famous Tyrian purple when you could let the world wonder and keep cashing in? Let's zoom out and see how these maritime maestros fit into the big picture. The Phoenician city-states, Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, to name a few, were like a Mediterranean version of Silicon Valley, each vying to outdo the other in innovation and influence. This wasn't just friendly rivalry, it was fierce competition that drove them to explore new markets and refine their shipbuilding techniques. They were like the ancient tech startups we know today, constantly iterating to stay ahead of the curve. But here's the twist. While they were busy outsmarting each other, they were also forging relationships across the Mediterranean. From the Greeks to the Egyptians, the Phoenicians had a Rolodex of contacts that would make a modern diplomat green with envy. They traded not just goods but also ideas, acting as conduits for cultural exchange. Their ships were like vessels of soft power, promoting Phoenician culture and, in some cases, even spreading their alphabet, a legacy that would outlast their empire. Yet, despite their cultural contributions, the Phoenicians were more than just ancient philanthropists. They were also shrewd business people, always keeping an eye on the bottom line. Their trade networks were carefully curated to maximize profits, and they were experts at reading the economic winds. If a market dried up or a new opportunity arose, they were ready to adjust their sails and forge new paths. Now, Let's bring it back to the ships themselves, those magnificent vessels that made all this possible. In a world where a ship could be the difference between economic survival and obsolescence, the Phoenicians had no choice but to innovate. Their ships weren't just vehicles, they were investments, each one a carefully calculated risk. They understood that in trade, as in life, fortune favoured the bold and the well-prepared. Think of their shipbuilding as akin to creating a luxury brand. Each vessel was crafted with precision, designed not just to withstand the elements, but to showcase Phoenician ingenuity. They were the Rolexes of the ancient world, a testament to the skill and craftsmanship of their makers. And just like any luxury item, they came with a hefty price tag. But for the Phoenicians, the cost was worth it. Each ship was a symbol of their maritime prowess, a floating advertisement for their skills and wares. Yet for all their success, the Phoenicians knew they couldn't rest on their laurels. In an ever-changing world, adaptability was key. They had to be ready to pivot, to embrace new technologies and techniques just to stay afloat, literally and figuratively. Their story is a testament to the power of innovation, a reminder that in the world of trade, those who stand still are left behind. As we continue our journey through the annals of Phoenician history, let's keep in mind the delicate balance they struck between ambition and pragmatism. They were dreamers and doers, builders of ships and bridges between cultures. And while their empire may have faded, their legacy sails on, a beacon of what can be achieved through ingenuity and determination. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into their story, let's remember that the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were pioneers, navigating a complex world with courage and cunning. And while the seas may have changed, the spirit of the Phoenicians lives on, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity. So, as we sail into the sunset of our Phoenician Odyssey, it's time to reflect on the ripples these shipbuilding savants left in their wake. The Phoenicians didn't just build boats, they laid down the blueprints for maritime dominance that future empires would come to treasure, like a pirate would a chest of gold doubloons. Their legacy is like a historical GPS, guiding civilizations far beyond their own timeline. Let's kick things off with the Romans. Ah, the Romans. Those empire-building aficionados who could turn a city into a metropolis just by sneezing in its general direction. When they weren't busy constructing aqueducts or debating in the Senate, they were learning a thing or two from their Phoenician predecessors. The Romans adopted the bireme and trireme designs, those sleek, multi-oared galleys that were the sports cars of the ancient world. The Phoenician knack for compact, efficient naval architecture helped the Romans become the undisputed naval superpower of the Mediterranean. Sure, the Romans loved to boast about their military prowess, but they were standing on the shoulders of Phoenician giants who knew their way around a shipyard as well as they did a balance sheet. Even the Greeks, those philosophers of the waves, had a maritime playbook that featured Phoenician footnotes. The Greeks didn't just snag the Phoenician alphabet, they borrowed heavily from their ship designs too. The legendary Athenian triremes, which played a starring role in the Battle of Salamis, were descendants of Phoenician innovation. With 3 tiers of oarsmen and a bronze ram ready to punctuate negotiations with rival fleets, these ships were essentially the ancient equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, versatile and effective. It's no exaggeration to say that without the Phoenicians, the Greeks might have been all talk and no sail. But let's not stop at the Mediterranean. The Phoenician legacy drifted far and wide like a message in a bottle on an eternal voyage. Fast forward to the age of exploration, and you'll find echoes of Phoenician seafaring spirit in the likes of Columbus and Vasco da Gama. The Portuguese and Spanish explorers borrowed heavily from the navigational techniques that the Phoenicians had perfected centuries earlier: celestial navigation, understanding wind patterns, and the sheer audacity to venture beyond the horizon. These were gifts from the Phoenician toolkit that made the age of exploration possible. It's as if the Phoenicians were the original members of an ancient maritime LinkedIn, connecting oceanic explorers long before anyone thought to name a continent after Amerigo. Now, let's shift gears and debunk a few myths while we're at it. The romanticized image of the Phoenician sailor is almost as epic as their shipbuilding feats. Picture a rugged adventurer, a twinkle in his eye, and the open sea as his playground. This sailor is the ancient James Bond of the maritime world, right? Not quite. The reality was more like an episode of Deadliest Catch than Pirates of the Caribbean. Life on board was tough, gritty, and often downright miserable. Imagine being crammed into a wooden hull with a dozen other unwashed souls, the ocean spray your only shower, and a diet that made prison food look like a Michelin-starred meal. The romantic image of the Phoenician sailor is about as accurate as a reality TV show, a scripted fantasy with just a hint of truth. Yet, despite the hardships, the allure of the sea was undeniable. The promise of riches, adventure, and the chance to see the world kept the Phoenician sailors coming back. They weren't just traders, they were explorers, pushing the boundaries of the known world one nautical mile at a time. It's a testament to the human spirit, a drive to explore, to conquer, and yes, to profit. We may not have signed up for the same hardships today, but the spirit of adventure is as alive as ever, whether it's on the high seas or the information superhighway. So, what's the takeaway from our Phoenician deep dive? In short, these ancient mariners were the unsung heroes of the maritime world, the silent architects of naval technology whose influence spanned continents and centuries. Their ship designs and navigational techniques set the stage for future empires, proving that innovation can indeed be a tide that lifts all boats. Their legacy is a reminder that ingenuity can transform even the narrowest strip of land into a launchpad for greatness. In the end, the Phoenicians teach us that history is as much about the stories we tell as the realities we uncover. They weren't just masters of the sea, they were masters of their destiny. And as we look back on their contributions, it's clear that their spirit sails on, a beacon for those who dare to navigate the uncharted waters of innovation and adventure. So as you let these tales of ancient mariners drift you into a slumber, remember, the Phoenicians weren't just wandering the waves, they were charting a course through history. And that, dear listener, is a voyage worth remembering. You wake up to the sound of the bustling markets in ancient Etruria, the heart of what we now call Tuscany. The sun's barely risen, but life here waits for no one. You've got a full day ahead, crafting and selling your wares in the vibrant streets of Tarquinia, a city teeming with traders, locals, and the occasional Greek merchant trying to haggle for a bargain. As an Etruscan artisan, you're part of a unique civilization often shrouded in mystery, possibly because the Romans were too busy conquering to write anything nice about you. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The clamour of the market pulls you into the present. Your first task? Navigating the cobblestones to secure materials. Copper for your tools, clay for pottery, and pigments to give that signature Etruscan flair to your creations. It's a good day when you can strike a deal with a local miner. Copper prices have been fluctuating thanks to increased demand from Greek colonies. You're looking at about 10 to 12 bronze coins a pound. Sure, it's costly, but it's better than dealing with an empty forge. Now, about those vibrant trade networks. Etruria might not have had the same panache as Athens or the military clout of Rome, but it was a trade powerhouse. Your neighbours' stalls are filled with goods from all over. There's amber from the Baltic, prized not just for its beauty, but because it makes people assume you're wealthy enough to own it. Never underestimate the power of perceived opulence. Then there are the ivory trinkets from North Africa, the kind that might make you question the ethics of trade even in 6th century BC. But hey, it's a living. Before you get too comfortable, let's talk finances. Managing money here is a bit like playing dice, unpredictable but thrilling. For starters, the economic dynamics of this place are no joke. You're constantly balancing the cost of materials with the hoped-for profit from your goods. Pottery, for instance, can sell for a few bronze coins if you're lucky, but that depends on the whims of the market and whether the Greek buyers are feeling generous with their drachmas. It's a complex dance of barter and coinage, and you'd better have nimble feet. Speaking of nimble, the day's just starting, and you need to be on your toes. Etruscan society is a tapestry of influence and interaction. You see it in the way markets operate, a blend of indigenous products and imported goods, all wrapped up in a culture that blends local tradition with foreign innovation. The Etruscans, often mischaracterized as mysterious, were in fact quite cosmopolitan. They spoke their own language, had their own gods, and even their own alphabet, which, let's face it, no one but us history buffs can read today. But mysterious? Nah, just misunderstood. As you haggle for materials, remember that the world sees you as part of a people who thrived on trade and cultural exchange. You're not just an artisan, you're a link in a chain that stretches from the heart of Etruria to the farthest reaches of the Mediterranean. Economics here isn't just about money, it's about identity, prestige, and survival. And while popular myths might paint the Etruscans as enigmatic shadow dwellers in the annals of history, the reality is a bit less romantic and a lot more industrious. The markets here are a place of convergence. See that Greek merchant over there? He's been eyeing your pottery as if it's the Parthenon itself. Your styles and techniques are influencing each other, whether or not either of you is willing to admit it. This cross-cultural pollination is what makes Etruria more than just a footnote in Roman history books. It's a reminder that societies rise on the backs of artisans, traders, and everyday people who keep the wheels turning. As you walk back to your workshop, materials in hand, you're reminded of the myth that the Etruscans were just another conquered people, swallowed whole by the Roman juggernaut. Sure, the Romans eventually took over, but not before borrowing a thing or two. Gladiators? That was your people's idea, a fact the Romans conveniently forgot to mention in their victory speeches. The truth is, the Etruscans were innovators, and their legacy, while often overshadowed, is woven into the very fabric of what would become Rome. Back at your workshop, you set to work. Clay spins on the wheel, copper takes shape under your diligent hands, and the familiar rhythm of creation fills the air. As the day progresses, your thoughts might wander to the future, to a time when your people will be remembered more for their mysterious allure than their tangible contributions. But for now, there's work to be done, and history waits for no artisan, no matter how skilled. So, as you shape your pottery and plan your next trade, remember that you're part of an intricate, dynamic society. Not just a background character in Rome's story, but a vibrant culture worthy of its own spotlight. And while myths may fade, the artifacts you create, those lasting testaments to Etruscan creativity, will endure long after the market stalls have closed. With each spin of the pottery wheel and clang of the hammer on metal, you're not just crafting wares, you're forging a legacy. The Etruscans were masterful artisans, and here's where we get into the nitty-gritty of what set their craftsmanship apart. Let's talk techniques, materials, and the kind of innovations that could make even a modern-day engineer nod in appreciation. First off, metalworking. Those Etruscan blacksmiths were the rock stars of their day, and let me tell you, wielding a hammer wasn't just about brute force. It was a dance, a sweaty, scorchingly hot dance between skill and creativity. They specialized in bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that was all the rage back then. Why bronze? Well, it's sturdy yet workable, kind of like Play-Doh if you heated it to 1,000 degrees. Don't try that at home. The process was as intricate as an Etruscan necklace. First, you'd cast the bronze in stone molds, a technique that required precision and a steady hand. You couldn't just wing it with a mold, it had to be perfect. Miss a step, and you've got yourself a melted mess, not a masterpiece. The Etruscans were also pioneers in the lost wax method, a fancy term for creating detailed sculptures by encasing a wax model in clay, heating it to melt the wax, and then pouring molten metal into the cavity. Think of it as 6th century 3D printing, minus the electricity. But what truly set them apart? Their ability to integrate artistry into utility. Etruscan mirrors, for example, weren't just for checking if you had spinach in your teeth. They were intricately decorated with mythological scenes, transforming everyday objects into storytelling canvases. These artisans were the kind of folks who looked at a plain surface and thought, why not add a little pizzazz? They were essentially early adopters of the form meets function philosophy. Now onto pottery. The Etruscans were particularly fond of buscherel, a type of ceramic that was a bit of a show-off. It's characterized by its black, shiny surface, achieved through a specialized firing process that starved the kiln of oxygen. The result? A sleek, metallic finish that would make any Spartan potter green with envy. Crafting buscherel wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a status symbol. Owning a piece signaled taste, wealth, and a certain je ne sais quoi that said you were in the know. Creating these pieces was no solo act. Enter the apprenticeships, the unsung heroes of Etruscan craftsmanship. Artisans didn't just pop out of the womb wielding a chisel, they trained for years under seasoned masters. It was a bit like being an intern, except instead of fetching coffee, You were learning how to manipulate molten metal without setting yourself on fire. These apprenticeships were the backbone of the trade, ensuring that skills passed down through generations. And if you think job listings are a modern invention, think again. The Etruscans had their own version of LinkedIn. Okay, so maybe it wasn't an app, but they definitely had ways to advertise for skilled labour. Archaeologists have uncovered inscriptions and graffiti that served as ancient job boards, advertising for everything from potters to metal workers. Imagine carving your job ad into stone. Talk about commitment. Now, let's dispel a myth or two. The life of an artisan wasn't all glamour and glory. Sure, you might picture yourself as a revered creator of beauty, but reality was a bit grittier. The work was physically demanding, the hours long, and the rewards often uncertain. You could slave away on a sculpture for weeks, only to have it sell for a pittance if the market wasn't in your favour. And while we're at it, let's toss out the notion that artisans were rolling in wealth. Most lived modestly, their income subject to the whims of trade and the volatile economy. But why did it matter? Why put in all the effort for such a tough gig? Because in Etruria, artisans weren't just craftsmen, they were cultural curators. They preserved traditions, pushed boundaries, and left behind artifacts that would outlast empires. Each piece they crafted was a tangible link to their society's soul, a reflection of what mattered to them, whether it was gods, battles, or the simple beauty of nature. The societal role of these artisans was complex. They weren't at the top of the social ladder, but they weren't at the bottom either. They occupied a unique niche, respected for their skills yet often overlooked in the grander narratives of history. It's a bit like being the drummer in a rock band, vital, but rarely in the spotlight. So, as you continue your day shaping clay and hammering metal, remember the delicate balance these artisans maintained, creators of beauty and utility, innovators and preservers of tradition. They were the unsung heroes of Etruria, their lives a tapestry of skill, sweat, and survival. And while their names might not be etched in marble like those of emperors, their work endures, speaking volumes about a people who excelled at the art of living. And with that, your focus shifts back to the task at hand. There's a new batch of clay to knead, more metal to melt, and the hum of the marketplace to accompany your rhythm. The day marches on, much like history itself, always moving forward, ever changing, yet somehow eternal. Keep those hands busy, the story isn't over yet. And as you're kneading that fresh batch of clay, let's delve into the cultural cocktail that was Etruscan art. Picture this, 6th century BC. Italy was a bit like the Mediterranean's answer to a modern-day music festival, an eclectic mash-up of influences, each leaving its mark like a catchy chorus. The Greeks were our headliners, their art and philosophy strumming the strings of inspiration across Etruria. But don't count out the opening acts. The Phoenicians with their rich tapestries and the homegrown Etruscan traditions that added a unique flair to the mix. Let's start with the Greeks because, well, they were the rock stars of the ancient world. Their influence on Etruscan art was as pervasive as a top 40 hit on repeat. Greek pottery, with its distinctive black figure and red figure techniques, was the stuff of envy, and Etruscan artisans were quick to riff on these styles. They'd see a crater from Athens and think, yeah, we can do that, but let's add our own spin. The result? Art that didn't just mimic, but conversed with Greek culture, often incorporating local legends and iconography. Take the Etruscan tomb paintings, for example. These vivid frescoes were more than just decor for the afterlife. They were cultural narratives painted on walls. Greek myths often made appearances, but with a twist. A local hero might elbow his way into the scene, or a familiar landscape would serve as the backdrop. It was like fan fiction, but with more gods and fewer copyright issues. Now, let's talk Phoenicians, those master sailors and traders who spread their artistic influence like it was a new social media trend. They brought with them intricate metalwork and ivory carvings that made their way into Etruscan hands. The Etruscans, in turn, adapted these techniques to create their own masterpieces. Imagine seeing a Phoenician piece and saying, "Great craftsmanship, but what if we added some Etruscan flair?" And so they did, blending foreign methods with local motifs, a testament to their knack for cultural assimilation. But hold your horses. Before we get swept away by the romance of this cultural melting pot, let's pump the brakes and ask, who were the real movers and shakers in Etruscan art? Here's a hint. It wasn't always the artisans themselves, despite their skill and creativity. The true tastemakers were the patrons, the wealthy elite who held the purse strings and, by extension, the creative reins. These patrons were the ones commissioning those grand tombs and intricate jewelry pieces. They had the power to dictate style and subject matter, often choosing motifs that reflected their own status and aspirations. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of influencers, curating their own personal brand through art. And just like today's influencers, they weren't shy about flaunting their wealth and cultural sophistication. This brings us to a myth worth busting: the romanticized idea of Etruscan artisans as free-spirited creatives whimsically crafting away in serene workshops. The reality? It was as structured as a modern-day commission. Artisans were often at the mercy of their patrons' whims, tasked with bringing someone else's vision to life. Sure, there was room for creativity, but it was creativity within constraints, a bit like being asked to think outside the box, but only after someone else has drawn the box for you. Navigating these influences required the diplomacy of a seasoned politician and the adaptability of a chameleon. Artisans had to balance the demands of their patrons, the allure of foreign styles, and their own cultural heritage. It was a high-stakes game of artistic diplomacy, and the stakes were your livelihood. Get it right, and you'd secure more commissions. Miss the mark, and you might find yourself out of work faster than you can say terracotta. Yet, despite these constraints, Etruscan artisans managed to carve out a distinct identity, one that was neither wholly Greek nor entirely indigenous, but a vibrant blend of the two. It was this ability to synthesize diverse influences that made their art so compelling, a cultural dialogue etched in stone and painted on walls. So, as you continue shaping that clay, consider the layers of history and influence in your hands. You're not just crafting a pot or a statue, you're engaging in a centuries-old conversation, one that speaks to the heart of what it means to be Etruscan. Each piece you create is a testament to a culture that thrived on exchange and adaptation, a society that found strength in diversity long before it was a buzzword. And while myths might paint the Etruscans as mysterious artisans working in splendid isolation, the reality was a bit more like a bustling, ancient version of a multicultural art collective. Etruscan art, much like its creators, was a product of its time, dynamic, diverse, and undeniably distinctive. As you put the finishing touches on your latest creation, remember that you're not just preserving a tradition, you're participating in an ongoing legacy, one that continues to shape our understanding of the past. And who knows, maybe centuries from now, some curious mind will look at your work and wonder about the artist behind it, just as we do today with those ancient masterpieces. But for now, there's still work to be done, and as long as there's clay to mould and metal to shape, the story of Etruscan art continues to unfold. And as you wrap up that last piece, you can't help but notice the looming shadow of Etruscan politics hovering over your workshop like an overzealous art critic. You see, in 6th century BC, Etruria, politics and art were as tangled as a ball of yarn after a kitten's played with it. Let's dive into how those political machinations could elevate an artisan to dizzying heights or sink them into obscurity faster than you can say Tyrrhenian Sea. First, let's talk about the bigwigs, the Etruscan aristocracy. They weren't just patrons of the arts, they were the puppet masters pulling the strings of society. Politics here was a family affair, quite literally. The Etruscan city-states were dominated by powerful clans who treated politics like a game of chess, with each move calculated for maximum gain. And you, dear artisan, were often just a pawn on their board. But hey, a well-crafted pawn can still win the game, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting: political alliances. These weren't just strategic marriages and handshake deals, they were full-blown artistic opportunities. When two city-states cozied up for a mutual benefit, the demand for art skyrocketed. Suddenly, the ruling elite needed grand tombs to cement these alliances, adorned with frescoes and sculptures that screamed, "Look at us! We're totally besties now." And who did they call on to fashion these masterpieces? That's right, you and your fellow artisans. But here's the catch. Political tides could turn faster than a potter's wheel. One moment you're flush with commissions, crafting intricate jewelry for an upcoming diplomatic shindig. The next, you're staring at an empty workshop because the alliance soured and the money dried up quicker than last night's wine. It's a bit like being a Hollywood screenwriter at the mercy of studio execs. One minute you're the toast of the town, the next you're back to waiting tables. Let's not forget the constant threat of war. Etruria wasn't exactly known for its peaceful cohabitation with neighbours. Wars with the Greeks or skirmishes with those pesky Romans could make or break your career. During wartime, the demand for armour and weaponry surged. Metalworkers found themselves in high demand, crafting everything from swords to shields. But peace treaties? They could send those same artisans scrambling for work. It's a boom and bust cycle that would make a Wall Street trader feel right at home. And then there were the political reforms. Ah, the sweet scent of change or chaos, depending on your perspective. Every now and then, a reform-minded leader would emerge, promising to shake things up. Maybe they'd cut taxes for artisans, leading to a golden age of creativity. Or maybe they'd decide that what Etruria really needed was a massive public works project, funneling all available resources away from the arts. Talk about a political roller coaster. Now, here's a myth worth busting, the notion that Etruscan politics was a gentleman's game of strategy and diplomacy. In reality, it was more like a gladiator match, brutal, unpredictable, and not for the faint-hearted. Political intrigue was as common as buckaroo pottery, and you, the humble artisan, had to navigate these murky waters with the agility of a cat on a hot tin roof. The ruling class wasn't just interested in art for art's sake. They used it as propaganda, a means to showcase their power and prestige. Commissioning a grand work of art was a way to flex their political muscles, to remind everyone just who was in charge. And as much as you'd love to believe that your art was a pure expression of creativity, the truth is, it was often a cog in the political machine. But let's not paint too bleak a picture. After all, being an artisan under the thumb of Etruscan elites wasn't entirely a Sisyphean task. There were perks too, like the occasional sumptuous banquet at a patron's villa where you might rub shoulders with the upper crust of Etruscan society. These events were as much about networking as they were about enjoying roasted boar and fine wine. It was a chance to secure future commissions, to embed yourself further into the intricate tapestry of Etruscan politics. And let's talk about those banquets. Forget your typical wine and cheese soiree. This was an extravagant display of wealth and power. The elites spared no expense, and the art on display often reflected this excess. Frescoes adorned the walls, depicting mythical scenes and heroic ancestors in a bid to impress their guests. The more opulent the art, the higher the host's status. And who made all this possible? You guessed it, the artisans. In this cutthroat world, connections were your currency. An artisan with the right patrons could ride the political waves with ease, securing commissions and avoiding the pitfalls that claimed less savvy craftsmen. It was a delicate dance, a balancing act between art and politics, where one misstep could spell disaster for your career. So as you navigate this political minefield, remember, you're not just an artisan, you're a survivor, a diplomat in your own right. The tools of your trade aren't merely hammers and chisels. They're the relationships you cultivate, the alliances you forge. And while the myths might paint Etruscan artisans as solitary geniuses toiling away in obscurity, the reality is that you were as much a part of the political landscape as any senator or magistrate. And with that, you return to your workshop, the clamour of the market fading into the background as you pick up your tools. The day marches on, the wheel of history turning ever onward. There's work to be done, commissions to fulfill, and a political storm to weather. As you shape clay and hammer metal, you're not just creating art, you're carving out a place for yourself in a world where art and politics are forever intertwined. The story of Etruscan artisans is one of resilience, adaptability, and a relentless pursuit of excellence amid the shifting sands of political change. And while the myths might cast you as a nameless craftsman in the shadow of history, the reality is far more nuanced. You're a vital thread in the rich tapestry of Etruscan life, a testament to the enduring power of art in the face of adversity. So keep those hands busy, for the story isn't over yet. There are still alliances to form, battles to weather, and a legacy to forge. And as long as there's clay to mould and metal to shape, the tale of Etruscan artisans will continue to unfold, one masterpiece at a time. As the sun dips towards the horizon, casting its golden glow over the terracotta rooftops of Tarquinia, you pause to consider the legacy you and your fellow artisans will leave behind. The day's toil still lingers in your hands, a tangible reminder of the storied journey of Etruscan artistry, Now let's take a closer look at how these ancient innovations paved the way for Roman art and culture, a legacy as enduring as the marble columns of the Colosseum. First up, let's talk architecture. Etruscan temples with their sturdy foundations and columned facades were the blueprint for Roman religious structures. Picture the grandiosity of the Pantheon, a Roman marvel, owing much to the Etruscan knack for engineering. Your ancestors were the unsung heroes who figured out how to keep those massive stone blocks from tumbling down, a skill that the Romans took and ran with faster than a toga-clad Usain Bolt. Now, about those frescoes. Etruscan tomb paintings didn't just stop at adorning the resting places of the elite. They were a kind of visual diary, capturing the vibrancy of everyday life, from banquets to battles. These artistic chronicles influenced Roman frescoes, which evolved into the elaborate wall paintings that decorated the villas of Pompeii and Herculaneum. And while the Romans might have added a touch of their own flair, the Etruscan influence was as clear as a bell, or in this case, a mural. But let's dig deeper into metalwork, the bread and butter of Etruscan artisanship. Etruscan bronze mirrors, intricately engraved with mythological scenes, were more than just vanity accessories. They became a staple in Roman households, their reflective surfaces polished to perfection. Roman metalworkers inherited the techniques of lost wax casting, a method so advanced it could put modern manufacturing to shame. This process allowed for the creation of detailed sculptures and, more importantly, those ubiquitous Roman coins. Because what's an empire without its currency, right? Speaking of coins, the Etruscans were among the first in Italy to mint them, setting a precedent for the Roman monetary system. Those small discs of metal weren't just for commerce, they were a symbol of power and control, helping to unify the sprawling Roman territories. And let's not forget the economic savvy behind these innovations. The Etruscans understood the value of a stable currency, long before the Romans turned it into an empire-building tool. Now let's tackle a myth that persists like a historical hangover, the idea that Etruscan culture was merely a stepping stone to Roman greatness. While the Romans did excel at adopting and adapting useful innovations, the reality is that they stood on the shoulders of Etruscan giants. The Etruscans weren't passive players in their own story, they were the architects of a cultural legacy that shaped the Mediterranean world. And here's a sharp observation for you. Civilizations are like magpies, collecting shiny bits from those that came before. The Romans were no exception, borrowing liberally from Etruscan art, religion, and even political structures. The Senate, that illustrious hallmark of Roman governance, finds its roots in the Etruscan practice of rule by council. So next time someone praises Roman efficiency, remember that it was the Etruscans who first taught them how to organize a political gathering without it turning into a shouting match. But why do the Etruscans remain such a subject of fascination today? Partly because of the tantalizing gaps in our knowledge. Their language, a puzzle with more missing pieces than a thrift store jigsaw, adds an air of mystery that captures the imagination. The Romans, with their penchant for erasure, left us with only fragments of Etruscan history, an enigmatic whisper from the past. In a world obsessed with certainty, the Etruscans remind us that some stories remain just out of reach, waiting to be unravelled. Yet, it's not just the mystery that keeps us captivated. It's the realization that the Etruscans were pioneers, craftsmen who challenged norms and expanded the horizons of art and culture. They were the original trendsetters, the ones who dared to blend foreign influences with local traditions, crafting a unique identity that resonated far beyond their time. As you pack up your tools, the workshop now a shadowy haven of creativity, consider the enduring impact of your craft. Each piece you produce holds the promise of continuity, a link in the chain of artistic evolution. The Romans might have been the headline act, but the Etruscans set the stage, proving that even in the shadows one can cast a long legacy. So, as you step out into the evening air, the scent of olive oil and roasting meats wafting through the streets, remember that you're not just an artisan, you're a custodian of a vibrant culture. The Etruscans may be gone, but their influence lingers, woven into the very fabric of Western civilization. And while history might not always sing their praises, the echoes of their achievements continue to resonate, a testament to the power of innovation and adaptability. And with that, the day draws to a close, the stars beginning to twinkle in the inky sky above. The markets are quiet now, the hustle and bustle replaced by the gentle murmur of distant conversations. The wheel of history keeps turning, and as long as there are stories to tell and art to create, the legacy of the Etruscans will endure, a beacon of inspiration for generations to come. Emperor Wu of Han had a knack for turning the ancient world into his personal chessboard, maneuvering through the turbulent waters of geopolitics like a seasoned Grand Master. Reigning from 141 to 87 BCE, he wasn't just another footnote in China's imperial saga. He was the guy who decided that the Han Dynasty wasn't going to be a backyard operation. Nope, if anything, Wu was the poster child for go big or go home, and he definitely wasn't going home. Back in Wu's day, the Han Dynasty was a sprawling entity with borders that stretched wider than a modern-day influencer's follower count. But with great territory came great responsibility, and also a whole lot of neighbours who weren't exactly sending over fruit baskets. Enter the Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic tribes from the steppes who were less about peace talks and more about raiding. These folks were the Han's northern nemesis, and Wu had to deal with them without letting things spiral into an endless game of Risk, the ancient edition. This was where diplomacy came in, and it wasn't just about exchanging pleasantries over tea. Wu needed a strategy that was as slick as silk, literally. Around 130 BCE, the Silk Road came into existence, not as a single path, but more like a network of trade routes that spanned from China to the Mediterranean. Picture a web of paths crisscrossing deserts and mountains, like an ancient Google Maps without the turn-by-turn directions. The Silk Road was Emperor Wu's secret weapon. It wasn't just about trading silk for exotic spices and shiny baubles. It was about weaving a tapestry of alliances and economic ties. The romanticized notion of the Silk Road as a mystical, bustling highway of riches is all well and good, but let's not kid ourselves. It was more grip than glamour. Traders weren't exactly gliding along a golden road. They were trudging through some of the planet's harshest terrains. The 4,000-mile stretch from Xi'an to the Mediterranean was a test of endurance, not to mention patience, with sandstorms and bandits as constant companions. But the Silk Road wasn't just a highway for silk. Sure, silk was the star of the show light, valuable and portable. It was the Bitcoin of its time. Yet the road also saw the exchange of everything from jade and gold to spices and textiles. And let's not forget the ideas and religions that hitched a ride along these routes, blending cultures like a historical smoothie. Emperor Wu knew that control over these trade routes wasn't just about economic gain, it was about influence. By bolstering trade, he could indirectly extend his reach and sway over various tribes and kingdoms along the way. The Silk Road was a diplomatic tool as much as it was a commercial one, turning distant lands into potential allies or, at the very least, less hostile neighbours. So, while poets and romantics might wax lyrical about the Silk Road as some kind of ancient Shangri-La, the reality was a bit more down to earth. It was a lifeline, a venture fraught with peril, and an open invitation to the world to engage with the Han Dynasty, whether with open arms or wary eyes. Emperor Wu didn't just see a trade route, he saw a way to knit together a world that was, quite literally, worlds apart. In the end, Wu's reign wasn't just about expanding borders or keeping the Xiongnu in check. It was about connecting a world that was just beginning to understand the power of global networks. And in that, Emperor Wu wasn't just a ruler, he was a visionary, paving the Silk Road, not just with silk, but with the aspirations of a dynasty that dared to dream beyond its horizons. Now, speaking of knitting the world together, let's talk about Emperor Wu's slightly less glamorous but equally strategic move, the Hequan marriage alliances. If you think modern diplomatic dinners are awkward, imagine the stakes when your marriage is supposed to stop a marauding horde. Hequan was the Han Dynasty's version of marry your way out of trouble, a tactic that involved sending Chinese princesses off to the Xiongnu as peace offerings. Sounds romantic, right? Well, scratch that. It was more like sending a peace treaty with a dowry attached, hoping it wouldn't get lost in translation or lost in the steppes. Now, these weren't your usual fairy tale weddings with doves and harp music. Instead, they were meticulously planned political maneuvers. The idea was simple: marry off a princess, secure peace. Yet, the reality was anything but simple. The princesses were often not of imperial lineage, but were labelled as such to keep up appearances. Imagine if your pen pal turned out to be your least favourite cousin. Surprise! The first of these Hequan alliances took place in 118 BCE, when the Han sent a so-called princess to marry the Xiongnu chieftain Modu Chanyu. The price tag wasn't cheap either. The Han court sweetened the deal with silk, grain and wine, a setup that would make even the most lavish modern wedding registry look modest. And this wasn't just a one-time expense. The Han Dynasty sent these offerings annually, a sort of subscription service for peace. This makes you wonder if they had a frequent diplomat program or at least a loyalty card. But here's the kicker: despite the grand gestures, the Xiongnu weren't always swayed by these matrimonial overtures. The alliances were less about love and more like a cautious handshake across a minefield. These marriages were supposed to foster goodwill, but the Xiongnu often saw them as a sign of Han's weakness. A thanks for the bride, we'll still raid you next spring kind of deal. In fact, historical records show that the Xiongnu raided Han territories multiple times during these peaceful unions. It's like paying for a ceasefire and getting an invoice for more arrows instead. From the Han perspective, it was a precarious balancing act. They had to appear strong enough to deter aggression, but flexible enough to engage in diplomacy. The He-King policy wasn't merely a band-aid fix, it was a long-term strategy to buy time. Time for the Han to fortify borders, build armies, and negotiate trade routes that would eventually tilt the balance of power. Emperor Wu knew that peace was often not just a matter of might, but of right timing and negotiation. The Heckin alliances were not just diplomatic gestures, they were placeholders in a long game of political chess. Meanwhile, the women sent off in these alliances had their own roles to play. They were cultural ambassadors, expected to learn the ways of their new homes while subtly promoting Han interests. It was a tough gig, being dropped into a world where your in-laws might prefer horse milk to green tea. The royal court spun tales of these princesses as noble sacrifices for the sake of the empire, but the reality was far less rosy. They faced isolation, cultural clashes, and the constant pressure of representing an entire civilization. Yet, despite the challenges, some of these women managed to wield influence in their new domains. They became intermediaries, bridges between two worlds that spoke different languages, literally and politically. These princesses were not just passive pawns, they were active participants in the diplomatic dance, proving that soft power can sometimes be as effective as a battalion of soldiers. Their stories may not have always been the fairy tales we imagine, but they were crucial chapters in a saga of survival and statecraft. So, while the romantic notion of a princess saving the day might appeal to the poets and playwrights, the truth was more complicated. These alliances were a testament to the harsh realities of politics, where personal lives were sacrificed on the altars of statecraft. The He-Kin marriages remind us that history is not just about grand conquests or epic battles, it's about the quieter, often overlooked strategies that make or break empires. They show us that diplomacy isn't always about handshakes and treaties, but sometimes about the quiet resilience of individuals caught in the crossfire of history. As Emperor Wu navigated these treacherous waters, he knew that the key to dealing with the Xiongnu was a blend of caution, patience, and, when necessary, a well-placed wedding invitation. But the art of negotiation didn't stop with marriage alliances. It extended to trade agreements, military maneuvers, and, in some cases, outright bribery. Because, let's face it, sometimes a well-timed gift was worth 1,000 words. In the end, the Han Dynasty's diplomatic efforts with the Xiongnu were as much about managing perceptions as they were about managing borders. Wu's strategy was less about fighting fire with fire and more about keeping enough water on hand to douse the flames, or at least keep them at bay long enough to build a bigger bucket. And speaking of keeping enough water on hand, let's dive into the story of Zhang Qian, a man who was sent on a diplomatic mission so perilous it makes modern politics look like a cakewalk. In 39 BCE, Emperor Wu had an idea as audacious as it was desperate: send an envoy to the mysterious lands to the west to forge alliances against the Xiongnu. Entered Zhang Qian, not your average bureaucrat, but a man about to embark on a journey that would redefine the concept of business trip. Now, Zhang Qian wasn't just any guy picked off the street. He was a palace attendant who, presumably, had the right mix of courage and naivete to say yes to a mission with odds that would make a Vegas bookie sweat. His task? To reach the Yuezhi, a group of people who had been previously thumped by the Xiongnu and might be looking for a little payback. The plan was simple: convince the Yuezhi to join a coalition against their common enemies. The execution? Anything but. So, Off Zhang Qian went, armed with maps that were less Google Earth and more "here be dragons." His entourage was a modest 100 or so men, which sounds impressive until you recall they were trekking through hostile territories, where the Xiongnu had a habit of turning travellers into permanent residents, against their will. And sure enough, Zhang Qian's journey took a detour when he was captured by the Xiongnu, who weren't exactly known for their hospitality. For over a decade, yep, you heard that right, Zhang Qian was held captive, living among the Xiongnu. Imagine trying to fulfill your job duties while being essentially on house arrest with your arch-nemesis. But Zhang wasn't twiddling his thumbs the whole time. He observed, he learned, and most importantly, he waited for the opportune moment to escape. It took him 10 years, but he finally seized his chance, proving that patience isn't just a virtue, it's a survival strategy. Upon his escape, Zhang wasn't just ready to go home and call it a day. Nope, he was a man on a mission. He continued westward, eventually reaching the Yuezhi, now settled in what we know today as Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, by then, the Yuezhi had moved on from their vendetta against the Xiongnu and were more interested in their new digs than in waging old wars. Talk about a diplomatic dead end. But hold on. Zhang Qian's journey wasn't a bust. On his way back to China, he gathered a wealth of information that would make any intelligence agency drool. He learned about the vast lands of Bactria, the riches of India, and the bustling markets of the Parthians. He didn't just return with tales of distant lands, he brought back the keys to new trade routes, laying the groundwork for what we now call the Silk Road. It was like discovering the world's first global marketplace, only without the online shopping cart. And here's where the myth-busting kicks in. Zhang Qian's tale might sound like an epic saga of a lone hero, but let's cut through the romance. His journey was less about the thrill of adventure and more about the grind of survival. The logistics of ancient travel were nothing short of nightmarish. We're talking about traversing deserts, where the only thing more plentiful than sand was the silence, or scaling mountains so treacherous that one misstep could turn you into the next archaeological find. And let's not forget the constant threat of armed bandits who weren't keen on letting travellers pass without a toll, usually in the form of everything you owned. Yet, despite the hardships, Zhang Qian's mission wasn't just a footnote in the annals of history. His journey was a turning point that expanded the Han Dynasty's horizons beyond anything Emperor Wu could have sketched on his geopolitical chessboard. The information Zhang brought back wasn't just about trade or geography, it was about the possibility of connectivity in a world that seemed vast and disparate. He proved that even when political alliances fall flat, cultural exchange can open doors to economic and diplomatic opportunities. So, while it's tempting to picture Zhang Qian as the Marco Polo of his day, gallivanting across the ancient world with a twinkle in his eye, the truth was far more grueling. He was a man caught in the crossfire of political ambition and the harsh realities of the ancient world. His story is a testament to human endurance, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, and the unyielding spirit of exploration. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest impact comes not from the battles won, but from the bridges built, however perilous the construction. Zhang Qian's journey ultimately showed that diplomacy wasn't just about the deals struck or the treaties signed. It was about understanding the lay of the land, literally and figuratively, and finding common threads in a tapestry of diverse cultures and interests. His legacy wasn't just the routes he mapped, but the narrative he wove, one that continues to echo in our understanding of global relations today. As we look back at Zhang Qian's Odyssey, we're reminded that history isn't just written by the victors, it's also penned by the survivors, the observers, and the occasional envoy who dared to venture beyond the known world. And while his mission might not have achieved its initial diplomatic goal, it opened a door to a world that was ready to be discovered, one silk thread at a time. So, what's next on this whirlwind tour of Han Dynasty diplomacy? Stay tuned, because we're just getting started. Zhang Qian might have set the stage, but the show is far from over. There's more intrigue, more maneuvering, and yes, more silk to unravel as we continue to explore the art of diplomacy in an era where every journey was a leap into the unknown. And who knows? Maybe the next chapter will have a twist that even Zhang Qian couldn't have foreseen. As Zhang Qian set the stage for the Han Dynasty's foray into global diplomacy, he left behind a legacy that was as much about economic incentives as it was about the grand narratives of political strategy. Now, Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of those economic carrots that the Han Dynasty dangled to keep the peace with their neighbours, and sometimes to reel them in like prized fish. It's time to talk tributes and gifts, the ancient world's equivalent of diplomatic currency. Forget the notion of diplomacy as a polite chat over a cup of tea. This was more like a high-stakes poker game, where the stakes were measured in silk rolls and jade carvings. And boy did the Han know how to play their hand. Let's start with the Xiongnu, the thorn in the Han's side, and the reason for many a sleepless night in the imperial court. The Xiongnu were notorious for their raids, but they weren't entirely immune to the allure of Han luxury. Enter the tribute system, a shrewd blend of appeasement and economic strategy. The Han Dynasty, under Emperor Wu, regularly sent tributes to the Xiongnu that included silk, grain, and other goods. Think of it as a subscription box delivered to your local warlord, aimed at keeping him at bay for another season. These tributes weren't just about buying peace. They were a calculated move to inject Han goods into Xiongnu society. Silk, for instance, wasn't just a fabric, it was an economic powerhouse, lightweight and incredibly valuable, making it the perfect product to transport across vast distances. It was the ancient world's answer to cryptocurrency, easily traded and highly prized. By flooding the Xiongnu market with silk, the Han Dynasty ensured that their northern neighbours were more economically tied to them than they might have liked to admit. But it wasn't just about silencing the Xiongnu's war drums. The Han also engaged in what we might call gift diplomacy, a tactic that involved sending lavish gifts to other states to secure alliances or, at the very least, favourable trade terms. Take the case of the Wusun, a Central Asian tribe whose friendship the Han court was eager to cultivate. Around 105 BCE, Emperor Wu sent a diplomatic envoy loaded with gifts that would make a modern-day diplomat's eyes water. We're talking about gold, silk, and precious stones, enough to turn any foreign dignitary's head. These gifts weren't just tokens of goodwill, they were investments. By showering the Wusun with wealth, Emperor Wu was essentially saying, "Hey, we're the kind of friends who show up with impressive presents. Maybe consider siding with us in your next geopolitical conundrum." It was less about generosity and more about strategic positioning. The Han Dynasty understood that in the world of diplomacy, sometimes the best defense was a well-timed display of wealth. And let's not forget the absurd lengths the Han went to impress foreign dignitaries. In 97 BCE, the Han court hosted an envoy from Parthia, a kingdom that controlled a crucial stretch of the Silk Road. To dazzle their guests, the Han orchestrated elaborate banquets, complete with exotic animals and performances that rivaled any Cirque du Soleil show. Imagine a feast where the main course was a roast beast, and the entertainment involved acrobats flipping over the imperial dining table. It was a spectacle designed to convey the message, "We are prosperous, we are powerful, and you do well to remember it." These displays weren't just about showing off, they were a form of soft power, a way to project the Han Dynasty's influence without firing an arrow. By impressing foreign dignitaries, the Han hoped to foster goodwill and ensure that their trade routes remained open and profitable. It was a delicate dance, balancing the need to maintain a strong image with the economic realities of keeping the imperial treasury in the black. Speaking of economic realities, let's hit the pause button on the glitz and glamour of diplomatic gifts and talk about the cold, hard truth. These tributes and gifts weren't cheap. The Han Dynasty had to juggle the costs of maintaining a vast empire with the expense of keeping their neighbours happy, or at least not openly hostile. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of silk rolls, tons of grain, and countless gold ingots, all carefully accounted for in the imperial ledger. This economic juggling act meant that the Han couldn't rely solely on material wealth to keep the peace. They had to be savvy, using trade agreements and strategic marriages to supplement their gift economy. It was a reminder that in the world of ancient diplomacy, even a powerful dynasty like the Han had to watch their spending. Peace might be priceless, but it certainly wasn't free. So, while poets and storytellers might wax lyrical about the grandeur of Han diplomacy, the reality was far more practical. It was about using economic incentives to weave a complex web of alliances and dependencies, a tapestry where every gift, every tribute had its place. The Han Dynasty wasn't just trading silk. They were trading an influence, crafting a narrative of power and prosperity that resonated across continents. As we continue to explore the art of diplomacy in Han Dynasty China, we'll uncover more stories of economic cunning and strategic foresight. From the bustling markets of Bactria to the distant lands of Rome, the Han Dynasty's reach extended far beyond what any single emperor could have envisioned. And as we peel back the layers of history, we'll find that the true power of the Han wasn't just in their armies or their wealth, but in their ability to turn economic incentives into a tool of unparalleled influence. Stay tuned, because the story of Han diplomacy is far from over. There's more intrigue, more maneuvering, and more lessons to be learned from a world where every gift was a calculated move in the grand game of geopolitics. As we delve deeper into the past, we might just find that the challenges of ancient diplomacy aren't all that different from those we face today. And who knows? Maybe the next chapter will reveal a twist that even the savviest diplomat couldn't have foreseen. As we delve deeper into the fabric of Han diplomacy, it's time to pull back the curtain and take a hard look at what the Han dynasty left behind, both the glittering successes and the not-so-glamorous pitfalls. Picture this. Emperor Wu's grand chessboard, now a bit dusty, still sprawls across the annals of history, each piece a testament to the art of ancient statecraft. But what did it all mean? And more importantly, what does it mean for us today? Let's start by revisiting the myth versus reality of Han diplomacy. The romanticized vision of the Han as a benevolent power, weaving peace with silken threads and lavish gifts, doesn't quite capture the gritty reality. Remember those so-called princesses sent off to the Xiongnu? They weren't exactly Cinderella heading to the ball. Their tales were woven into the fabric of survival, not fairy tales. These Hekin marriages were less about love and more about buying time, to fortify, to strategize, to outmaneuver. And while the Xiongnu were the perennial thorns in the Han's side, they were also the reason the Han became masters of the diplomatic poker face. Speaking of poker faces, let's talk about those diplomatic gifts. Gold, silk, and precious stones weren't just shiny baubles to impress kings and chieftains, they were the original diplomatic currency. The Han dynasty was effectively investing in a diverse portfolio of alliances, using gifts as down payments on peace. This was less about generosity and more about securing favorable trade terms, and, when successful, it turned potential adversaries into trade partners. However, when it came to the Xiongnu, these gestures often landed with a thud, like a well-intentioned gift card at a party where cash is king. The Xiongnu continued their raids, showing that even the most glittering of gifts couldn't always buy loyalty or peace. Then there's Zhongqian's Odyssey, a tale that's more Indiana Jones than Marco Polo. His journey wasn't just a triumph of endurance. It was a revelation that the world was far bigger and more interconnected than previously imagined. Zhongqian's intelligence trove laid the groundwork for the Silk Road, turning the Han's gaze westward to lands rich with potential. Yet, let's not romanticize his ordeal. It was a decade-long grind of captivity and cultural diplomacy, not an epic of daring-do. His story underscores a critical point. The most successful diplomacy often happens quietly, without fanfare, in the subtle spaces between cultures. But if we're going to sing the praises of Han diplomacy, we also need to fess up to its failures. The Han court's reliance on lavish tributes and gifts was a double-edged sword. Sure, it opened doors and built bridges, but it also drained the imperial coffers faster than a profligate heir at a casino. The economic strain of keeping friends close and enemies closer was a reality. The Han couldn't entirely escape. The cost of peace was often measured in tons of silk and barrels of wine, a reminder that in the world of diplomacy, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So, what's the takeaway from this tapestry of treaties and tributes? First, the Han dynasty's approach to diplomacy was nothing if not ambitious. They didn't just play defense, they rewrote the rules of the game. By leveraging trade routes and strategic marriages, the Han extended their influence far beyond their borders, setting a precedent for future empires. Their legacy lives on today in the way modern states navigate international relations, balancing hard power with soft and economics with ideology. Yet perhaps the most enduring lesson from the Han era is this: diplomacy is often about playing the long game. It's not just about the treaties signed or the gifts exchanged, it's about the relationships built and the networks forged over time. The Han understood that while swords can carve out empires, it's the silken threads of diplomacy that weave them together. In a world where the stakes were survival, the Han turned diplomacy into an art form, one that continues to resonate through the corridors of power today. In the end, the story of Han diplomacy isn't just a tale of ancient statecraft, it's a reminder of the timeless complexities of human interaction. It's about the dance of power and perception, of influence and intrigue. And in that dance, the Han left a legacy that's as relevant now as it was 2 millennia ago. So, as we close the book on this chapter of history, let's remember that diplomacy, like history itself, is never static. It's a living, breathing narrative, one that we're all still writing. And there you have it, Han diplomacy in all its glorious complexity. A tale of silk and swords, of gifts and gambits, and of a dynasty that dared to dream bigger than the horizon. It's a story that challenges us to look beyond the myths and see the reality. One where the past is never just the past, but a prologue to the present. So, next time you find yourself in a diplomatic conundrum, remember, sometimes all it takes is a bit of silk, a well-timed gift, and the patience to wait for the right moment to make your move. History, after all, is nothing if not a series of well-played hands.